agenda today is items of interest from the commissioners. Then we have consent agenda, consideration of minutes from 10/28 and November 4th meetings. And then we have comprehensive plan work session. There will be no testimony, but we will have first the Citizens Involvement Committee presentation, and then we will have Bureau presentations from the bureaus, and then we will, as a commission, look at work session agenda and hopefully conclude and be out of here by 7. So to start, items of interest from the commissioners. Anything? Chris, and then we'll go to Howard.
Yeah. This morning I attended, I think it's on, isn't it? Am I on? This morning I attended a digital inclusion summit that was organized by the Office of Community Technology and keynoted by the mayor. And I hope we can reflect some of the themes when we talk about broadband policy for the city.
Joe, Director.
Just one item. You received via email the recommendation from the Blue Ribbon Committee on the Public Utility Review Board that's suggesting that the setting of the city's solid waste rates be something that the Planning and Sustainability Commission review. They haven't acted on that recommendation yet, so it's still just a recommendation. And in the next month, Michael Armstrong's going to be coming to the Planning and Sustainability Commission leadership meeting to sort of explain what's involved with that whole sort of piece of work. So just a heads up that there's more information on that to come.
Okay. Howard?
I have a question for you, Joe, which is originally that oversight was established by, I believe, a law. A citizen utility board was formed. Was it not by a vote of the people?
You know, Howard, I do not know.
Because that CUB was the original oversight here. And in moving this thing around, the sewer and the water, from place to place, are we conforming, I'm wondering, with the intent of that law? I believe it was a law that was passed establishing a citizen utility board. Do you remember that, Don?
I don't remember the details of it.
So as we go into it, it'd be interesting to say if it's legal.
Right, so I will make sure that Michael's aware of that question, and he's actually knowledgeable about this, and it's something new to me as well. So I'll have him bring that to leadership.
Okay, and just to be clear, it will not only be garbage rates, but water and sewer rates. Is that correct? Or just
no, I believe it's just solid waste.
Solid waste.
Yeah, I haven't read the full recommendation, so I don't know what's happening with all the rates.
That's great.
Okay.
They're creating a new board for water and sewer, giving us the leftovers, as usual.
No leftovers. Literally, yes.
Garbage commission. I like that.
Garbage commission. And we will be, as part of that, we would be asking for 2 to 3 members from the commission to be a subcommittee to then make recommendations to the commission, which would be forwarded on to city council. So think about that and
Do it by age.
I just see that.
Do it by age.
do it by age.
Yeah.
The youngest?
The youngest go
No,
first.
the oldest. The
By
smart
attendance.
one.
I like that. You're not here, you're in. Yeah. Consent agenda.
I move approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Been approved. Comprehensive plan work session. Again, this is not a hearing, but a work session for us. But citizens can still comment through written testimony, and they can provide that to a link to on the Bureau website, I believe.
Yeah, my slide presentation has the slide with that information on it.
Then take it away, Eric.
Right. Just to start off the work session portion of the agenda, and a reminder that what we're trying to cover tonight in that portion of the agenda is to, you'll hear a few minutes from me just to give an overview of where we are. You'll hear from the CIC, the progress report. You'll hear a number of city bureaus give their observations on the draft plan where it stands today. And you should have received a collection of bureau comments over the last few days through email. They're filtering in, so we're sending those as we receive them. Then we'll talk about the recommended work session schedule for early 2015. And then I think if there are any commissioner observations at the end, we're happy to hear that as you have been doing to go around the room. A reminder that what this is all about are these deliverables on the screen here: the draft policies, the draft land use map, urban design direction, which is related to both the policies and the maps, and then the citywide system plan, or CSP, which, and then also within those documents is the project list, essentially, the list of significant projects. This commission in previous years has reviewed a set of background reports to establish the facts by which we're making some of these decisions, so I thought this was an appropriate time to remind you of some of that work. There was a buildable lands inventory and an infrastructure condition report, housing needs analysis and an economic opportunities analysis, and a new natural resources inventory. The EOA was submitted to the state and then subsequently withdrawn, and you'll be hearing from us in early 2015 with a new draft of that in conjunction with your economic work session discussions. A reminder that you also adopted in 2012 the Portland Plan, which set the stage, the strategic framework, and the higher level policy direction for what we're trying to accomplish with the comprehensive plan. So the comp plan is essentially a tool, one of the potential tools to implement the Portland Plan. With the Portland Plan, we adopted metrics to judge performance, and I handed out the official data sheet from the Portland Plan just to remind you all of what goals we set for ourselves in that plan, and would encourage you to refer back to that as we're debating what the right thing to do is on the comp plan. In 2013, you had a hearing and discussed what we called the growth scenarios report, which also tried to operationalize some of those metrics into a number of measures that we could that relate to land use and development, and those are on the screen right here. We looked at those measures around different spatial growth scenarios and came up with some evaluation of the different outcomes with different approaches to spatial growth in that report. So I would encourage you to keep that in mind as well and maybe refer back to that. We will be updating that report also this spring to reflect the direction you're headed with the comp plan and to show you where that we think those numbers are with the proposed plan. In that, we discussed also the details of different what different growth options might look like on the ground. We also reminded you that a big portion of how the city performs is related to what we call the legacy development pattern, that 2/3 of the development that's going to be here in 2035 is already on the ground. So there is a limit to how much we can affect through new development. We can't completely change all these numbers, but that growth obviously is an opportunity to influence the direction of which way those numbers are moving. We also, in the plan and in the earlier work, introduced this idea of access to opportunity, and this is a map from the housing chapter of the proposed plan, but it's similar to our 20-minute neighborhood map or our complete communities map, and the idea is that we want to locate people where there is good access to things that make them successful, whether that's jobs or educational opportunities or access to transit and those things. So thinking about not only how do we improve parts of the city that don't have those things, but how can we put people in the right places in terms of where growth is located. We also discussed where gaps are, and these are just 3 examples. There were others, but you may see a repeating pattern in where some of those gaps are, that East Portland is a gap on many of these metrics, and so keep that in mind as we discuss the map and the different policies. The plan has 7 key directions that we were trying to aim at with each of the the chapters, and I'm not going to read them, but we went over these earlier, and so I'd encourage you to keep those in mind. We also introduced terms for different place types like town centers and civic corridors and neighborhood centers and different pattern areas and natural feature labels. That played out on the urban design framework, but if we're successful, it also is evident in the land use map and in the policies. We talked about what those different designations might mean in terms of the type of development that would occur in those places. We also talked about an investment strategy, which a reminder what that chart is. It's each of the centers on our centers and corridors map is represented up there, and on the vertical axis is, well, the horizontal axis is the population in 2035, so the things at the right side are bigger places in 2035, and the things on the left side are smaller. And then the vertical axis is needs, so the things at the top of the diagram have a greater gap in infrastructure. They may lack sidewalks or parks or access to transit, complete streets. So the hypothesis there was if we have limited resources, thinking about investing in what's in the upper right, which is the areas that are simultaneously receiving a lot of growth and have a lot of gaps in infrastructure. Also a reminder that we're in a periodic review process that's governed by a work plan from the state, and we're in task 4 of that work plan. And you've just held 4 hearings on task 4, but I want to remind you that you also held a number of hearings on each of the earlier tasks. And so I think if I were counting hearings, you'd be up to maybe 15 or 20 when you consider the entire package leading up to where we are within this periodic review process. So you held hearings on the community involvement plan and adopted it. You held hearings on the background reports, quite a few, in conjunction with the Portland plan. And then we held a hearing on the scenario report as part of our alternatives analysis, and there's more work on that. And then you'll be also holding more hearings as this unfolds later with task 5 when you talk about implementation details. And I also passed out for your information a new handout on the mixed-use zones project because there's been a lot of testimony about details on that. This is our initial proposal that frames up what zones we're proposing with that project and the basic framework of those zones. So that is informative of where we're headed with that. You're not going to have hearings on this until later in the spring 2015, but we want you to see where we're going. And this is all still in progress in an advisory committee. This is a map of where the land use changes were proposed, and you heard testimony from all over that map, essentially, and some of the areas where we didn't propose change. Oops, that was a duplicate slide. The work sessions coming forward, as I mentioned, are going to be January through March. We're also having a TSP hearing in February, and then there's a series of hearings in April, essentially about the EOA and the scenarios report, and I would characterize those as kind of the performance evaluation phase of your work. It's where we get to look at whether we're achieving the goals we set out to do, and the task in those will be public hearings. The task is to review those reports, but they obviously relate to the larger plan and the direction you're heading with the plan. We showed you this drawing before. You're at a pivotal point here where you're wrapping up the initial round of hearings and you're going into work session. As the chair mentioned, you're continuing to receive written comments through the work session period. And then, as I said before, there's a performance evaluation phase in April before you get to a recommendation. Just a quick update on what we're hearing from the public. This is up to date as of last week. This is a map of where the map app comments have been received, and this pattern has been holding pretty steady from the last time I showed it to you. We have a lot of comments from inner southeast Portland, some from northeast, some from north and outer east. Those are just the online comments. The distribution numbers are here. Again, inner southeast being the most prolific with online map comments. In terms of the topics covered in those comments, the land use, the centers and corridors, the neighborhoods, and the transportation system are the most popular items there. In terms of policy comments, unlike the last time we did this chart, we broke out West Hayden Island into a separate category just because you had so many on that one topic. And so after doing that, the economic and environmental are no longer in the lead, and you have transportation and urban design and centers and corridors being also important topics. A reminder to the public that we are still accepting comments through the map app, and you can reach that on our website. Also a reminder, I think I announced this at one of the more recent hearings, but we recently released I describe this, I guess, as the wonky version of the map app. If you want to see the map app proposals overlaid over top of a lot of data, there's a button you can push to get to this version of the map app that has a deeper set of background information that you can overlay with our mapping proposals. And we're calling that the Map App Explorer, just to distinguish it. And then the slide I mentioned earlier, you can send comments to the Planning Commission through the email on the screen here, the psc@portlandoregon.gov, or you can send it to the PSC at 1900 Southwest 4th, 97201, or through the map app again. Or if you just have questions and don't want to call, you can also just call our helpline, which remains open for questions. I'm going to now turn it over to the CIC update, but when I come back, we'll go into more, after hearing from Bureau comments, we'll go back to talking about the draft work session schedule, which you should have in front of you that looks like this. So I'll be back to talk about that after you hear from the CIC and the bureaus.
Okay. So now we're going to have the Citizens Involvement Committee, and the people that are presenting, they should come up. And Howard, you're going to introduce this?
I am.
Thanks.
I'm going to try. Fellow colleagues, you've heard me for some months or maybe years encourage you to join me in the work of the Citizens Involvement Committee. It's been going on for some time now, and it was established way back when by Mayor Potter. They're going to report to you tonight on the work that the Citizen Involvement Committee has been involved in, immersed in, and made comments on, and introducing them and trying to make the case that they are us. We are volunteer commissioners, and they are volunteer committee members, and we are all citizens of the same city. So there's not a them and us. There's a wanting to hear from our fellow citizens what they hear in their communities. And these folks all represent some form of committee. I just spilled this water all over. So without further ado, I want to introduce the committee. Thank you. And from us, thank you for the work, for the time, for the energy, and for the endless hearings. You heard Eric go on about hearings. You know about hearings. You've heard about them and participated. Let me introduce the group by calling on Stan Penkin first to introduce the rest of you, and welcome.
Thank you, Howard. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Stan Penkin, and I'm happy to be here as a participant in presenting the more recent work of the Community Involvement Committee, affectionately known as the CIC. Having been a young man back when the CIC was created as part of the Portland Plan process, and I do appreciate the job security though, I'm pleased to introduce two relatively new members of the committee who will be co-presenting this evening. Denise Barrett to my left and Kenneth Doswell, along with Linda Netakoven, who is also an old-timer like me and has been on and she's been on the CIC also since the very beginning. Jessica Connor, another new member who helped with this presentation, unfortunately was not able to be here this evening. I'm excited about the energy and enthusiasm these and the other new members have brought to our collegial group that has felt like a family to us these past 5.5 years, during which we have had some 47, speaking of lots of meetings, 47 full committee meetings, not to mention scores of subcommittee meetings, presentations, workshops, work fairs, and so on. We respectfully ask, if possible, that you hold any questions you might have till after we complete the presentation. So, what is the CIC and who are we anyway? The CIC was chartered to review and make recommendations on the community involvement efforts for the entire periodic review process, including the Portland Plan and the Comprehensive Plan update. The CIC reviews past involvement efforts and results and previews upcoming involvement approaches and activities. The committee makes recommendations to you guys, Planning and Sustainability Commission, and staff on ways to continue or improve its public involvement activities so they meet the overall goals of the Public Involvement Work Program. In July of 2009, 18 diverse and committed volunteers came together to begin its work on the outreach efforts of the Portland Plan. As an outgrowth of Vision PDX in the Tom Potter administration, the Sam Adams administration, through the Portland Plan, continued the process and expanding the process of a serious, thorough, and inclusive citywide conversation about what we want our city to be in 25 years. The Portland Plan was a 3-year process of understanding where we as a city were currently and what our vision and goals were for the future. The Portland Plan set the stage for the development of the Comprehensive Plan update, which is our topic of conversation today. I am honored to have been a part of this process and to have had the opportunity to work with so many devoted individuals, from my fellow committee members to the incredibly professional and dedicated staff at BPS. The committee wishes to thank and acknowledge the many staff members at BPS who guided us through this deliberative and important process. While we cannot mention everyone, we want to especially express our appreciation to Marty Stockton, Deborah Stein, and Eden Dabbs, who have been with us since day one. I would be remiss, too, if I didn't acknowledge and thank esteemed Commissioner Howard Shapiro for his chairmanship of this committee and how he expertly and ably led us through these 5.5 years, even at times when we weren't sure what we were doing. But thank you, Howard. While the comprehensive plan will be reaching its adoption stage, we hope, in the near future, it will not be the end, but rather the foundation of an ever-evolving progression of making Portland the best it can possibly be for everyone. What follows is our summary of recent community involvement efforts in the comprehensive plan update process. And I just want to note that this presentation today is a summary and observations, but it is not an evaluation at this point. That will be coming later on. So we'll be back here with an evaluation several months from now. Thank you. On to Denise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. So as Stan had introduced me earlier, I am one of the newer members of the CIC and really pleased to be here. The reason why I applied to be with the CIC.
Your name.
Oh, Denise Barrett.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. The reason why I decided to join the CIC is a relatively new member of the Portland community. I really brought with me 20 years of working in intercultural participatory engagement, and I really love how this is evolving here in the city and want to be a part of especially equity outcomes for the city. So I'm happy to be here. So as Stan also said, this is a straightforward report, and there is a memo in your packets that has a lot more information. So there is a lot of information we're going to share right now, so thanks for bearing with us. Since April 1st, 2014, the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, together with local partners, has implemented a wide range of public information and outreach activities for the comprehensive plan update. Methods employed have ranged from fairly high-tech, as you saw earlier, the MAP app, you're all familiar with that, to traditional outreach methods, such as community meetings and public hearings. The intent of all of these activities was to inform the public about the elements of the proposed comprehensive plan, proposed draft, and its effect on specific properties answer questions from the community, and ensure that people who want to provide testimony to the Planning and Sustainability Commission are prepared to do so effectively. The first that I will speak about is online tools and information. The primary tool used to communicate and provide opportunities for input on the proposed map changes was the online map app, an interactive map showing the proposed map changes, the transportation systems plan, and infrastructure investments. Since July 2014, the map app has registered roughly 30,000 page views and approximately 1,200 comments. It's been popular. The Bureau of Planning and Sustainability has also continued to use the Comprehensive Plan Update web pages and e-news to reach the public. The Comprehensive Plan Update website received over 275,000 page views between December 2013 and November 2014. On September 9, 2014, an online open house was added to the website, allowing site visitors to review the materials produced for the 3 physical open houses, which I will describe later in this presentation. Over 4,000 visits were made to that site through November 10th of this year. The Comprehensive Plan e-news, which goes out monthly, was sent in October to 6,355 email addresses, and about 27% of those recipients opened the email, and a portion of those went deeply into the content. To explore new ways to communicate dense and complex topics in a matter of minutes, as well as reach more people more quickly, urban designers and communication staff created 3 topic videos. These helped explain the reasons for some of the land use map changes as expressed in the map app. One video talked about creating more land for jobs, and 2 others talked about the reasons and rationale for down designating for natural hazards and stormwater constraints, as well as infrastructure deficiencies in East Portland. Another series of videos for the Comprehensive Plan Update is still in progress. Those that I mentioned are still online and can be accessed on the BPS website. Articles and advertising in local newspapers was also used. The BPS staff placed quarter-page display ads in 9 community and/or cultural papers in June and July of this year to announce the release of the map app and pending release of the proposed draft plan, followed by quarter-page ads in some papers in August and September, issues to advertise the upcoming public hearings, which you've all been through. The Bureau of Planning and Sustainability staff also worked with journalists at a variety of media outlets to inform coverage of the Comprehensive Plan Update, resulting in more than 40 articles about the process. The Planning and Sustainability Commission held 2 public briefings during the summer. There were also 4 planning and sustainability hearings from September to November 2014. Of course, you were all involved, so you know that. 2 of the hearings were held at community locations, the PCC Southeast Campus and Park Rose High School. Over 250 individual pieces of testimony were heard. A mailer sent to individual property owners provided information about the hearings, and at least 20 people, in addition to those who offered testimony, came to each of the hearings. Staff was available to speak with community members one-on-one and explain how the proposed changes might affect them. Mailings. 3 mailings were sent out during the time period notifying owners of affected property. The first was sent to 17,338 owners of commercially designated property affected by the change of the mixed-use designations. The second was a general heads-up that went to 10,378 other property owners. The third mailer went to 41,551 property owners and included language required by Measure 56. Community meetings and events. Staff presented information about the comprehensive plan proposed draft at 99 community meetings and walks, and tabled at 4 community meetings or community events during this time period. These engagements drew a host of neighborhood and business associations, committees, and coalitions centered on land use, forest use, parks and transportation coalitions, school boards, and so on from all over the city. Also, in order to provide more one-on-one direct engagement opportunities, district liaisons held what they called district office hours. So 16 district office hours events were held in the districts. Open houses. 3 comprehensive plan open houses were held in early September and featured information about the comprehensive plan proposed draft as well as the early implementation projects. Open houses were advertised through the Comprehensive Plan Update website, the CPU e-news, social media, and at the district liaisons' community events and through their networks. And you may have seen down in the lobby, there's also a presentation that is available for the public as well. Learning and commenting sessions. To increase participation of communities experiencing rapid change or potentially vulnerable to changes proposed in the plan, the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability hired a consultant to assist with targeted outreach to these historically underrepresented communities. Through a listening and commenting session, staff met with members of a dozen community groups who identified areas of the plan they wanted to focus on in preparation for the public hearings. A small capacity building stipend was provided to these three groups, and they included Verde, Community Alliance of Tenants, and Portland Community Reinvestment Initiative. These groups wanted to explore the potential impacts of the plan on their communities more deeply. A district liaison was appointed to work with each group to help them prepare effective testimony to the PSC, and all three groups did testify before you. And we're happy to say that these initiatives are still continuing, and they will continue through April of 2015. Community engagement liaisons. Staff is working with the Office of Equity and Human Rights to connect with the community engagement liaisons in order to reach out to immigrant and refugee communities. While BPS staff is enthusiastic about this opportunity, because the program offers to connect with underrepresented and underserved groups, some logistical issues and other challenges are getting in the way right now to building these relationships, but I know that there's a lot more effort that they will exert towards that end. The Comprehensive Plan Helpline. The helpline, which you saw on one of the slides up there, was set up as a single point of contact for questions about the comprehensive plan. The intent was to make it easy for callers to get the information they needed and to allocate staff time efficiently. The helpline received more than 1,300 calls from July to October 2014. And there are very variable times when the helpline was staffed by either one or multiple staff. The helpline experienced a surge of calls on August 15th, when the Measure 56 mailer began to hit mailboxes. It was as if someone pushed a fear button. The call volume went out from 5 to 8 calls per day to an average of 80 calls, so more than 10 times a day for the following 2 weeks. 18 calls required language translation. Neighborhoods with more than 20 calls included those in the south, in the northeast, three in the northeast, 3 in the east, and 4 in the southeast. Caller questions varied widely, ranging from concerns about eminent domain to questions about the impact of development on specific properties. Almost all callers were responding to the mailers and were concerned about impact on specific properties. There's your cliffhanger. I would like to transfer to Ken to tell you more about what we heard.
Thanks a lot, Denise. Good evening, commissioners and public. My name is Kenneth Doswell. I'm a property owner and a small business owner on the corner of Fremont and Williams. I've been there about 15 years now, and so I could tell you firsthand, kind of what the feeling is like when the development comes. And what I've done is prepared kind of what we heard as a result of all of the input that we received. But I've had the opportunity to witness the transition in North Williams area, and really that was one of the big reasons why I made a conscious decision to become a part of the committee. My decision deals directly with the issues that all of us as residents face as large-scale developments come to our neighborhood. And I think if there's one thing that I want to drive home of what we heard, and that is good fences make good neighbors. And in this case, better communication is a benefit to everyone. I think it's important that we recognize that there is that communication and how we communicate and the media that we use and the voices that we use are critical to driving home what the messages that we want to deliver. And so what I've done is I've prepared just a few bullet points that I think will kind of help drive home my point. And I think one of the biggest things, right, that we heard was consider literacy, right? I think that it's fair to say that some of the targeted areas, particularly as we look in deep southeast and along 82nd and the Division Corridor, those areas that are targeted for future development have populations with a lower literacy rate than all of us in the room. This is key because a lot of important and time-sensitive information is sent to populations that are aging, they're vulnerable, and not as well read as many of us. And so one thing the commission I would like to consider as part of policy planning is ensure that those populations are communicated to in a manner that's easily understood. I think one of the other bullet points is consider race and socioeconomic background. As development plans advance forward, it's important to consider the socioeconomic background of the residents in that neighborhood. The areas that are targeted to be developed, particularly in your deeper southeast, are lower income and have really a mix of both minority and traditional populations. And as these neighborhoods change, the opportunity the commission has is to ensure that people that mirror the community are some of the ones that are delivering the message. It's much more easier to receive a message when it's coming from folks that look, sound, and talk like you than folks that appear different, and then you feel like they're talking at you instead of talking to you. So as the opportunities of development come, then let's make a concerted effort to basically, speak in the language of the folks that's going to be affected by it. I think one of the other things is, one of the third points is culture. And realize that development means a change in the culture in that community. I have a real life experience here. An example of Dawson Park, I think there was a $2.3 million renovation that was put in the park. And the question that the community had, and they asked me this question, I'm like, okay, I know as much as you guys, but so the question was, will they still be able to play dominoes? Now, they are referencing the mostly African-American men that play dominoes in the park. If you drive up and down either Williams or Fremont, you'll see it, and so they questioned whether or not everyone's belief was, as the community transition, that would be something that culturally that the neighborhood would lose. And it's refreshing that I can say to you, no, they're still playing dominoes in the park at Dawson. Okay?
Tell them they can. Tell them they can.
All right. So the commission must develop policies and decisions that are designed for the existing culture of that community, and the types of decisions that facilitate community buy-in and adaptability, right? And I think the one other thing is two other points. And this is a big one, right, is design concerns. And we've seen a lot of this. And we want to make sure that we're developing policy decisions that address two main concerns. One, the historical integrity of our neighborhoods. People come to Portland because they like it, because it's, there's a lot of feeling of we like the old homes, okay? We've seen an incident not long ago where someone wanted to tear down an old home, and there's a huge uproar about it. Even in the Elliott neighborhood, where development was coming, they said, no, wait a minute, we want this new development to mirror what's already in place. And so that's very important. I think the other thing is we want to make sure that you're putting policy in place that where you design in quality, right? 10 years from now, none of us want to, drive through our neighborhood and say, hey, that was a post-recession construction project, right? Because, now it's siding is falling off, and, it just looks a little less well kept than had we invested more up front. And so making sure that we put policy in place whereby we design in the quality. And I think all of us have a great appreciation for that. And I think the fifth point, and this really strikes a chord with me, is the fear. And the fear meaning, so what will happen to my property when large-scale development? I can tell you personally that I have 3 very large commercial buildings, one to my one directly behind me, one adjacent to me, and one directly next door to me. And I asked a lot of questions on the value of my property. Will it go down? Will it go up? It did go up because my taxes are a reflection of it. But I think the other thing is some of the folks will face issues that I have faced, and that with respect to a public right-of-way. There was an alley that that bordered my property line as well as the property line of the developers. They wanted one use for the alley. I needed it for a separate use. And so the question was around, what about access? Will I have, because I had the access, will I continue to have access? Okay? And so as we make these policy decisions, as we go forward, think about the folks that will be impacted, the folks like you and I that just happen to buy a piece of property that was located in an area that was targeted for development unbeknownst to them. Okay? The other one was, so what rights do I have, right? If they want to, let's say, abandon that public right-of-way, do I have to? Right? And I think this gets back to the point number one and being, literate, right? Because there is a lot of information, a lot of decisions that are put in paper and in writing that unless I was as, I guess, well-versed or well-read, I would have missed it. And so, making sure that that there's concern for that. And I think the other thing is, how do we ensure that we're not getting swallowed up by big, deep pocket developers? I mean, we're all community-based here, and I think one of the great things about Portland is that we can reach out and touch, right? We're neighbors, and yet in the same, right, we're all, well, I know I'm in favor of development, and I think as well most of us are, but at the same point, I don't want to feel like we're going to swallow you up. And I don't have that feeling, by the way. Even I'm really large buildings, but I feel like I'm, quote unquote, planted there. I think in summary, those are some of the main points. I feel that it's our responsibility and the responsibility of the commission to make sure that we put policy in place that address those type of issues, particularly in our fragile populations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Nadakoven. You've just been hearing some of the highlights about what we've been trying to do during this phase and will be continuing to do for the rest of phase 4. But I want to turn your attention briefly to how we move forward from here, kind of what happens in phase 5, the implementation of the comp plan in terms of community involvement. And I'd like to start with a line from the Department of Land Conservation and Development Citizen Involvement Guide that says simply, planning doesn't end with the adoption of the comprehensive plan, and neither does citizen involvement. So we clearly are charged with going forward. And we're not here, I want to stress, to make a recommendation as to specific steps or structures that should be put in place for phase 5. But we're basically here to ask you to begin to think about what kind of oversight do you want to see in place for the community involvement that accompanies the implementation of the comp plan. You know, I think probably more than any other group of people in the city, what some of the challenges and opportunities are that are facing us right now as we go forward with everything from climate change to population growth to environmental stewardship, and why it's so incredibly important that we've got the entire diversity of our community involved in rising to meet these challenges and take advantage of these opportunities. When it came to oversight of first the Portland Plan and now the Comprehensive Plan community involvement process, the city made a deliberate choice to establish a freestanding CIC to oversee that effort, rather than continuing to have the Planning and Sustainability Commission serve in that role. And your predecessors have served in that kind of role in the past. And the state, I want to quote a little bit, since we're obviously here in periodic review, I thought we'd look back at what the state DCLD, those folks say. It doesn't roll off my tongue for some reason. they're asking that each city and county maintain a committee for citizen involvement, and stating that in a world full of committees, you may wonder why Goal 1 calls for yet another. The answer lies in the fact that all of the organizations usually considered city councils and planning commissions, except a freestanding CCI or CIC, have multiple responsibilities. Some of these responsibilities detract from and even conflict with citizen involvement. So we need to think about going forward how to balance all that. The DLCD goes on to indicate sort of several possible alternative approaches the city could consider in fulfilling this involvement oversight role. And we assume that you may have other ideas, since you sit here week after week, month after month, hearing people's concerns about the involvement process. The obvious approaches are to designate yourselves as the Planning Commission as the CIC, to create a hybrid committee that could consist of, say, half Planning Commission members and half community members. And that could be either freestanding or perhaps function as a subcommittee of the Planning Commission. Consider asking the Public Involvement Advisory Committee, the PIAC, to assume this additional oversight role. The PIAC charter does call for a membership that consists of approximately half community members and half bureau staff. So that's something to keep in mind in regard to that option. And then lastly, to consider creating another freestanding CIC such as the one that currently exists, which does include, obviously, our fearless chair, a member of the Planning Commission. But I can report from personal experience that we've had a hard time populating it with additional Planning Commission members. I think some folks have joined us with good intentions, but workloads and other conflicts have made it difficult. So I'm just, trying to be realistic here as we kind of think ahead. And I also want to stress, these are not the only options, but these are some of the most obvious ones. And our committee recognizes that staff time and other city resources are critical factors in any decision regarding future oversight. And we also want to stress that if you may remember from reading the PIAC's letter that that group pointed out that the CIC must have the capacity to evaluate community involvement programs for multiple bureaus, review community involvement plans for larger scale individual projects, and create and maintain a community involvement manual to implement the comp plan goals and policies. So this, whoever takes on this oversight role does have quite a bit facing it or them. So without strong and meaningful and consistent public involvement in the implementation phase, our comprehensive plan isn't going to guide us to the outcomes that we seek for our city. So that's why we're asking you to start to think about this, to join your voice to the conversation in terms of how we best manage this. Again, you have, I think, a unique set of insights from the work that you do, and we very much appreciate that work. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions now? No, I said for us. Howard, do you want to start off?
Oh, I hope there are a lot of questions. But what I want to stress is that the makeup of the committee, four of whom you sit before you, is a wide diversity of Portland, represents an independent opinion, and I think looking to the future is a critical other voice to hear. And so I certainly favor an independent freestanding citizen committee that tells us to tell the city council what we hear, what we need, and what we need to do. My question to you all is, are we doing a good enough job in the world that you work in to reach out far enough to make enough people aware of what's going on? Because we hear a lot in this panel about folks who come here and say, give us more time, we don't have enough information, and so forth. Is there a bridge there to be or are we doing a reasonably good job of hearing more complaints as we move forward?
I've heard the issue as well about there being more time, especially an area in Southeast Portland who was asked for more time. I have sort of mixed feelings about that. I think the more time you allow, you're always going to want more time. And I think this process just can't go on forever. I think there's been tremendous amounts of outreach. There have been tremendous challenges with outreach. I've seen that since the beginning of the Portland plan. where so much of what was talked about was visionary and people didn't get it. And a lot of people still don't get it, but I think we reach the stage when we get into when we've gotten into the details of the comp plan, especially when you start looking at maps and people start seeing, hey, what's going to happen on my street? Then it becomes meaningful. Up until that point, when you talk about goals and policies and vision, it doesn't grab a lot of people. And there are a lot of people today, very, very literate people, friends of mine, I'm sorry to say, who don't have a clue about what the comprehensive plan is or what the Portland plan was. So these are challenges, and I don't think more time will alleviate those challenges. So at some point, I think you just have to do it.
I just have one more follow-up, and that is, are we doing a decent enough job, and I really want to focus on this, reaching the new communities, both of color and of ethnic minorities, that are moving into the city in rather large numbers? Are they being heard, and do they represent any voice on your committee?
I will start in response to that. I think we have come light years in the 5.5 years that I've been working on this effort, and we have a very long way still to go. I think we've built relationships that hopefully are going to be maintained going forward so that people aren't strangers to each other when it comes time to talk about an important planning issue. But I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, so I don't want to minimize that. And I do want to respond to your earlier question. One of my concerns is that people just get swamped with, I mean, literally I'm picturing little boats sort of tipping over with the amount of, the tsunami of information that's coming at them in some cases that they're expected to respond to, where you've got a 100-page document for the transportation system plan and the comprehensive plan and the parking study and the mixed-use zoning plan and the institutional, I've forgotten what the institutional review committee is called. And when all those things are coming at once, I think that's when you get that issue of, we need more time because we can't figure out all the puzzle pieces and we can't get them all to fit. And I don't believe in conspiracy theories in terms of the planning process. So I don't believe it's deliberate. And things get shoved and pushed because you're trying to juggle staff and, other things come up, or you need more, time to work with a particular group on an issue. But I think part of the challenge that we're facing right now is people are just drowning in the kinds of things they're being asked to respond to. And a lot of it is complicated, as people have indicated. I agree that you get to a place where, there just isn't more time. But I think part of the reason is we're asking people to do too much at once right now.
Just to add to that, in the time that's left, assuming that we maintain the current timeline, I think the outreach efforts have really been phenomenal. Yes, it'll probably never get to where it needs to be, but one of the impediments, and I learned this from being around and hearing from staff and seeing what's going on, is there could be a little more budget for BPS to expand some of the outreach efforts. They need more resources to reach out to those underserved communities that we really want to reach out to. So this is for really for City Council to hear, but I just want to kind of state it here. The resources could be better.
Commissioner Smith will take care of it. He takes care of the budget here.
Other questions? Mike?
I have a question. Just I want a second. I'm sorry. I'd never run for political office. I can't remember names. Ken. The point you made in terms of the importance of the messenger. I was on the Columbia Slough Watershed Council, and we have an event every year called Explorando al Columbia Slough, specifically targeted on the Hispanic community. Very successful event. I brought all the materials from Audubon Society and the Watershed Council, had them all on the table, and we had, I think, 350 people show up, families, which is exactly the audience we wanted. I was standing there with all this great information, and parent after parent would walk up to me and look at me and smile and walk off immediately. And I'd smile back, and that was the end of it. Ignacio Mares, who happened to be a good friend of mine, offered to come and do some interpretation. Well, he stepped up to the table, and literally within 5 minutes, there were 30 people around the table he was talking to, and the individual who put the event together for the Bureau of Environmental Services was incredibly brilliant. She invited a Spanish language radio station, live radio station. They did interviews, and I know half the people that showed up were a function of having that radio station going, and games for the kids. So the culturally appropriate approach makes all the difference when you're trying to do that kind of outreach. So I don't know, Deborah, if you and BES work together on any of those techniques, but they're pretty damn effective.
So I'm hoping you can provide some advice on a topic we've gotten testimony on in the comp plan hearings, which is about the role of neighborhood associations as vehicles of citizen input. In the Portland plan, we identified that we wanted more diverse avenues of citizen input, and language in the comp plan reflects, in the proposed draft, reflects that to a degree. We've gotten testimony that from the neighborhood associations that they have been diminished a little bit. And I think we certainly want to be respectful of neighborhood associations. They're a very valuable source of citizen input, but I think I've heard some desire for them to remain the quote-unquote official, is the word I'll use, channel. Do you have any advice for us on how to strike that balance between the historically very vital and important channel of neighborhood associations versus other channels of citizen input?
Thanks a lot, Chris. That's a tough question.
That's why I need help.
I'll field it as best I can. And this is based on my own experience. And I would say that the neighborhood associations or the business associations that are very, very important, very critical, because it's where a lot of us will come together and receive information where we couldn't, maybe we're not sitting in this audience, but maybe we'll make a Thursday night appearance at our neighborhood association and find out exactly what type of development is coming into our community. That's the only way I found out that there's a huge development coming up on North Williams on a large developer out of Seattle. It's the old Awame building, and it was very refreshing to hear it. But I know that had I not been at that meeting, that I would not have heard it, right? So I would have been basically, just impacted by it without any knowing what's going on. So I think the role of the neighborhood associations is very, very critical. It's very important because you're getting the folks that have to live the traffic, that have to live the congestion, that have to live the construction very early in the morning, middle afternoon. And I'm saying this because, it's very real. And so where would that individual or that small business go, right? The folks that are leased from me and their small law firm, this big building going up right next to them, bang, 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 8 hours a day, right? And so where do they go? Where, if they have a concern, and if the neighborhood or the business associations are not there, how would their voice ever really be heard, right? These are folks that probably can't come down here. So very, very important. I know that they've grown in a lot of political clout in some neighborhoods, and probably why there's an attempt to diminish some of their influence. However, I think that they're a real value add to our community.
In the spirit of full disclosure, I used to staff neighborhood associations in another county at another century, actually. And really. And I'm very active in my neighborhood association, my neighborhood coalition. However, and I think if perhaps the editors who revised the comprehensive plan document hadn't taken out our stellar introduction to Chapter 2, which talked a lot about the historic role of neighborhood associations and their importance, both then, now, and going forward. People perhaps would have seen that chapter in a slightly different light, but editing happens, and we're trying to figure out how to recalibrate. I think, but I also would point to Mike's recent comment. It is important sometimes, it is important for people to find ways to come together in settings that are comfortable for them, and where people look like they do, and perhaps in some cases speak the same language they do. So I guess the challenge for us going forward is to figure out how to create many portals for people to have access and to enter, and again, to figure out how notices work, and again, who's the official recipient, and those sorts of things. And ultimately, you can't escape if something's happening in a place, place kind of, it's a place-based issue. Somehow, the people that are affected in that place have to come together. And so, I think the thing that I guess makes me annoyed sometimes is we give neighborhood associations an impossible task, hoping that by luck of the draw, that each year you're going to have volunteers step up who are good at the web, good at doing newsletters and communicating, great at facilitating meetings, have enough spare time from their jobs, their kids, their aging parents, whatever it is, to go to all the meetings and stay in touch with all the things happening that might affect their neighborhood so that they understand them, intelligently when it comes time to talk about them. And then plus you also have the leftover energy to have, block parties and fun things for your neighborhood. And neighborhood associations do that more and less well, and they all go through ebbs and flows at various times in their history. And I mean, again, the history of this city is much richer because neighborhood associations have been there. They've contributed incredible amounts of time, energy, and wisdom to this process. Going forward, I keep trying to think about how much richer Portland is since 1974 when the system was established, how much the table has expanded in terms of who's at it and who feels like they know how to access things. And the goal now is to still grow that table larger without diminishing the role of the people that have already been involved, and making it clear that they're vital and we can't get the job done without them. But that we also need to be making ways for other folks to kind of make their first forays into the system. So I don't have a good answer for that, except we need to keep talking to each other and figuring out a good way to do it.
Very briefly, just to add on to what Linda said, there are neighborhood associations, and then there are neighborhood associations. There are 95 neighborhoods in this city. Of the 95, I don't know how many of those associations are really active and have really active people and are really engaged. My guess is that the preponderance of them do not. So therefore, while it's great for engagement through neighborhood associations, I think we still have to see how do we still engage in those neighborhoods where they do not have strong associations. And that's one of the challenges that we have.
Are there questions? Don?
I just have a comment. Thank you for
We can't get rid of him. That's the problem.
You too, huh?
My observation about Portland is that we'd rather have discussion and conversation than listen to speech. And I've seen that through the years. And I think the structure you're talking about is so that's how the word gets out. That's how we hear back. I'm really happy that you're focused on implementation. Good comments and maybe some options on that. We're headed for that, headed towards that as a commission. And we'll be considering it soon. The idea of an ongoing committee, Howard, has a lot of appeal. Because we rely on you to translate the information from here going out, but then also kind of coming back and weighing in with us. I would value that as a plan commission. So I'm glad you're focused on that. And again, thank you.
Howard, did you have any?
No, my final comment is that these fine people and their colleagues and I will be rejoining each other tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock for a CIC meeting. So if there's a question of dedication, you're looking at it, right?
We're actually staying here tonight.
Camping out.
I would just like to say thank you for your dedication, and I'm amazed at the number of meetings you do. I know we do a lot, but you do even more, and I know the time and commitment, not only for you, but everybody else that shows up to give you input. And I think it's valuable for you in some form. We need to discuss, but how we continue to get your diverse views back to us, and how you continue to kind of turn over a lot of opinions that aren't normally come through the normal channels of the neighborhood associations and new groups that are forming in Portland that are new to this country, new to the process, and you're able to reach out to those groups. And I think that's important information we need to hear about how they want their city to grow and prosper in the city. So thank you for that. And we need to decide to continue to do that in some form and receive that through implementation, because that really is when rubber meets the road. And you do see the building all of a sudden show up. It goes from vision to concrete, and we need to have that input at that time too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have Bureau observations.
We'll just read a list of who we understand is here, and if they could come up, and then we'll do it a little bit like we did with the hearings. Julie
Okay.
has that list.
So we'll start with the city attorney's office and the office of Bureau of Emergency Management. And then housing.
Okay. So these are the bureaus. You received bureau letters, commissioners, earlier today, and I guess yesterday and the day before, and they're just giving their comments and then questions if you have some. Good, sir.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Beaumont with the City Attorney's Office.
You want to get the mic close to you?
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Catherine Beaumont with the City Attorney's Office. Just a few reflections and thoughts from our office. And this really has been a time to reflect, because at the time I began working at the City Attorney's Office, Portland had just adopted its first comprehensive plan. Many years later, it's exciting to be working with BPS staff and the Commission as you consider a complete comprehensive plan update that builds on the successes and evolution of the city's first plan. We have worked closely with BPS in reviewing drafts of the plan, and we appreciate the considerable time and thought this draft reflects. We recognize that it strives to address many of the policies and values expressed in the Portland plan. As you begin your discussions of the draft plan and the public comments you've received, we offer two key thoughts that guided our review of the plan and may be helpful to you as well. First, our starting point is state law. It defines the essence of a comprehensive plan as, quote, a generalized, coordinated land use map and policy statement that interrelates all functional and natural systems and activities relating to the use of lands. In other words, the linchpin of a comprehensive plan is its focus on land and the way land is used. In this sense, the comprehensive plan is best viewed as one tool for implementing the Portland plan, particularly those elements of the Portland plan that are best reflected in land use policies and regulations. The city has other policies, plans, and programs that also serve as tools for implementing other elements of the Portland plan. We recognize that the universe of factors affecting land use has evolved since the legislature first defined what a comprehensive plan is more than 35 years ago. You can decide how broad or narrow you want the comprehensive plan to be. The one caution is that the more non-land use topics you address in comprehensive plan policies, the greater the risk that programmatic, budgetary, or other decisions to implement these policies may be open to legal challenges as land use decisions in appeals to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Striking a balance between these considerations was important to us in our review of the draft comprehensive plan, as we hope it is to you too. Second, language matters. The words you use in the comprehensive plan will determine whether the function of a goal or policy is to guide future planning efforts, the development of future code language, or the approval or denial of specific land use applications. It will determine whether a particular goal or policy imposes a mandatory requirement or expresses an aspiration or directional principle. This is particularly true of the guiding principles in Chapter 1. We encourage you to use clear language in the goals and policies so the meaning and function of each is unambiguous. Additionally, the draft comprehensive plan refers to other documents, inventories, and studies. How they are described will determine whether they're incorporated as part of the plan, serve as plan implementation measures, guide future planning efforts, or serve as support documents to the plan. We encourage you to consider whether it's necessary to refer to these other documents at all. Again, doing so may allow actions described in these documents to be challenged as land use decisions. If referring to other documents in the comp plan is necessary and worth that risk, you certainly can do that. Just be clear about your intent. We realize that developing a wholly new comprehensive plan is a complicated task. Like you, we want this updated comprehensive plan to serve the city well for the next 20 years. We offer our comments in the spirit of helping you accomplish that objective.
Thank you. We'll just wait for everybody and then we'll go.
Hi, my name's Jana Papefthimiou, and I'm the Planning and Preparedness Manager for the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, or PBEM. PBEM commented on earlier plan drafts last year and earlier this year, and I served as a member of the Watershed Health and Environment PEG. So I'm very gratified to see resilience identified as a key direction for the city and specifically addressed in a number of goals. And I also particularly appreciate the inclusion of two goals that are specifically promote planning for disaster recovery. I think resilience is embodied in this plan, not only in the goals that use this word, but also in the striving towards healthy, connected neighborhoods, which are the foundations of a resilient city. Building networks that enable residents to support one another through difficulties large and small. Green infrastructure to reduce flooding, reduce urban heat islands, and promote neighborhood connections is also the very best practice in building community resilience. I think these efforts have long been a focus for the Bureau and for this body, and they are well addressed in the draft plan. So today, I would like to focus my comments on two elements in this plan that I think are of interest to PBEM in particular, which are reducing development in density in hazard-prone areas and promoting seismic safety in the built environment. And then I'm going to speculate briefly on how a disaster could perhaps profoundly alter our plans and invite you to do the same. Our Bureau will also submit written comments later this month, but I'm here to listen as well, and I hope your questions will inform the comments that we provide. So, reduce density in hazard-prone areas. I'll start where I think this plan draft emphatically gets it right. Decreasing density on steep slopes near Powell Butte and in parts of the West Hills. PBEM strongly supports these proposed changes in the comp plan designations. Lowering the number of homes that can be built in areas subject to both landslides and wildland fires is absolutely the best way to protect the city from these significant and life-threatening hazards. This approach accords with the city's adopted natural hazard mitigation plan and with best practices in other communities. Current zoning designations would allow considerable additional development in areas that are already at high risk for both landslides and wildland interface fires. These areas are difficult for emergency responders to serve, and they can put responders as well as residents in harm's way. Limiting density in these areas will bring the amount of permitted development closer to what the landscape can support, reduce the city's exposure to risk, and may ultimately reduce not only response costs and property losses, but human suffering. I am aware that reducing zone densities may be disappointing, and it may be a hardship to some landowners. I think it is regrettable that was ever an expectation that steep slopes could be intensively developed. But lowering zone densities in hazard-prone areas is responsible change that reflects a commitment to real resilience, and I urge you to stay the course. Seismic safety. So landslides and fires are events that we have experienced in Portland, at least on a small scale. Earthquakes are an equally real risk, but one we have not experienced in our collective memory. In fact, Portland's earthquake risk was not well understood until the late 1980s, and building codes were not updated until the 1990s. And as a result, a large portion of Portland homes and commercial structures are not seismically sound and would be severely damaged by even a moderate earthquake. Many residences are not bolted to their foundation. This means in an earthquake, unbolted buildings basically fall off their foundations. They're disconnected from all their utilities, they crack, they become uninhabitable and mostly unrepairable. In Portland, there are also many unreinforced masonry structures, including multifamily and commercial structures which are not sound and would crumble in a moderate or severe quake. Adding to our woes, much of our industrial land is located in areas prone to liquefaction. This is a phenomenon where soils that are mostly sediment or fill reliquefy during an earthquake, so the buildings sink and fill with sediment in liquefaction zones. The proposed draft does not sufficiently describe or address these risks. So I would suggest that in Chapter 4, Design and Development, we include seismic safety retrofits along with crime prevention design and fire life safety design as an important value. And similarly in Chapter 5, Housing, I think it should include seismic safety as an element of healthy homes and promote seismic retrofitting to improve the life safety of structures. The plan draft now, to be fair, does mention seismic retrofitting. It puts it with resource efficiency alongside energy efficient upgrades, which are also important, but I think it sort of misses the point. The problem with brick buildings falling down on you is not that it's a waste of bricks. So I think it's in the wrong place. So the city is already working to improve our inventory of unreinforced masonry buildings and to identify an opportunity to increase retrofits of these structures. We have piloted a program to promote seismic retrofits in single-family homes, and these types of efforts ought to be supported by the comprehensive plan. I would say PBEM also raised this issue in 2 previous comment letters. Also, in Chapter 6, Economic Development, I think would benefit from some discussion of hazards. Just depicting the risk, the overlaying industrial lands and areas of liquefaction, I think illustrates this really well. And in fact, one particular area of concern that you can see on that, map is Linton. Many of you may know more than 90% of the state's liquid fuel passes through the tank farms and terminals in this neighborhood, which is vulnerable to earthquake liquefaction, landslides, wildland interface fires, and obviously hazardous material spills. A problem with this liquid fuel infrastructure could spell disaster for Linton residents and also completely disrupt the economy of our state, which depends greatly on gas and diesel to transport goods and workers. So it would benefit our economic resilience and public safety to include a goal to promote seismic retrofits of existing industrial infrastructure and to promote dispersion of these uses in the future. I also note that Linton is one of the areas proposed for some residential downzoning, and given all the risks that this community faces, I think that it doubly makes sense for this area. Okay, finally, recovery planning. Long-range planning documents like the comprehensive plan necessarily focus on the incremental changes that cities can achieve over time. It's the historic development patterns that we talked about in the beginning. As a disaster planner, I get to think about the ways that cities also sometimes change overnight. A major earthquake, a flood, or an industrial accident could severely damage a hazard-prone area of the city. And such a disaster would not change the goals that are identified in this plan, but I think it would invite reconsideration of the development patterns this document necessarily takes as a given. So while speculating about catastrophes may seem a bit dark, I think that if we give ourselves permission to consider these possibilities, there is an opportunity to do some interesting thought experiments, and without speculating too far, to note in this plan some areas that might be revisited following a major disaster that destroys a developed area or a major element of infrastructure. For instance, would we rebuild the East Side Freeway and all the Willamette River bridges over again after an earthquake? Would we again locate virtually all of the state's liquid fuel infrastructure and storage tanks in Linton? I think I would propose that refinements to the goals related to recovery planning to recognize the possibility of perhaps a radical change in the future. Because cities are dynamic. So whether change comes gradually with a warming climate, over a few years during an economic boom, or overnight with an actual boom, this plan should set us up on a path towards resilience. I think in general the changes proposed to address development on steep slopes are excellent, and the plan could be strengthened by additions that acknowledge the need to prepare for earthquakes and other similar events. So I thank you for the opportunity to raise issues from the standpoint of emergency management, and I look forward to continuing to work with you to build a resilient city.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bach, Commissioners. My name is Tracy Manning. I'm the Director of the Portland Housing Bureau, and I'll be brief. You have a lot of very diverse work to do. And I guess I'll just sort of lead with the fact that the Portland Housing Bureau works more closely with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and with the work that you do than any other bureau in the city, because we believe it is the most relevant to advance our mission of solving the unmet housing needs of the people of Portland. And in keeping with that, we worked closely with BPS and with the citizen commissions on the text of the comprehensive plan, and we very much support it. I appreciate Catherine's comments. I think we in several places wanted to be a little bit more aggressive, working with staff on equity who also wanted to be aggressive, but we understand and took the advice of our attorneys and did not want our housing work in LUBA. So we've got a big challenge in front of us, housing 120,000 households in the next 20 years is really daunting, especially knowing as we do that a large chunk of them will be considered low-income households, larger families. And, you know, of course, we're reminded during cold weather that at least 1,900 people in the city of Portland are not housed at all, and that's part of our challenge as well. That said, working with BPS on Chapter 5 housing, I'm really pleased to say that it reflects the important work that we do together all the time, and our joint priorities and what we think are reflective of the priorities of the Portland plan in the city. Just to sort of highlight a few that I think are strong and would urge some focus on. It really reflects the great work that we're doing together around the risk of displacement. The studies that Dr. Lisa Bates did at the behest of BPS. It's a great sort of document around planning and mapping that actually gives us the ability to think about maybe for once getting ahead of displacement in a real and meaningful way and to act. And so we are currently using those documents and that learning to set policy and to make funding decisions today. And that work on displacement is reflected in the document, and the ability to mitigate it is so important. And we're really glad to see it there. Another place that we're working closely together, again, thinking about how the city grows, is opportunity mapping. So opportunity mapping basically reflects what we all know, which is that one of the things that is the greatest determinant of your health and your success in life is actually your zip code. And so mapping where, what I always sort of colloquially call the goodies in town, the great school districts, the great transportation, access to jobs, parks, the things that you think you probably fairly intuitively know, the things that translate into complete neighborhoods. We did, with tremendous amount of side-by-side work with the Bureau, that mapping to inform, once again, mapping and policy that's reflected in the comprehensive plan that we're using today to make funding decisions. And so I have on my desk these opportunity maps and these displacement maps, and I flip through them frequently as we're making policy and funding decisions. So I think it's something that I appreciate. I'm not a student of planning, and so the fact that this work is something that we use and to act on is really important to me, and I think that's reflected here. And then finally, I think, and it's a place where we continue to struggle, but is really important, and I appreciate the inclusion of really strong language around housing access. So in addition to having affordable housing, it matters a lot to us that low-income people and people particularly with additional barriers, people from communities of color, can access the housing that is called for in these plans. We've still got a long way to go to do a good job of that. We all know, of course, that low-income people, and particularly communities of color, are moving further and further east, and the disadvantages of being further away from those goodies are a real problem and something that we need to tackle. But it starts right with recognizing it, recognizing that it's not something that's acceptable to us, and including that language in the plan that our city is going to use to guide our development going forward. So those are the things that we would highlight as the things that we appreciate and are a high priority for our ability to do our work on a day-to-day basis. So thank you for your guidance in including these items in the plan.
Great. Questions? Okay, let's go Chris, Mike, and then Howard.
So I have questions for both Catherine and Jonna. I'll take on Catherine first and wait for another turn to come back to Jonna. So I appreciate that the state legal framework is about land use. I think from where we sit, this is our opportunity to take the important strategies of the Portland Plan and adopt those by ordinance as policies for the city. And whether the policy fits under land use or fits somewhere else, I don't really want to give up that opportunity. And it makes sense if we have a set of policies around something like complete networks, some of which are or complete neighborhoods, some of which are land use policies, and some fit in other buckets, to adopt those together. So have you talked with staff about some method of parallel adoption where we sort of adopt this in two piles, one that fits the state framework and one or other things we want to add on, but run them through city council at the same time, but keep this pile out of LUBA's jurisdiction? Have you talked about that at all?
Not specifically yet. It's a conversation I'd be happy to have with staff.
Mike?
Well, I've got a follow-up question on that one, because I thought I heard you say that, for example, if there's a particular hypothetical sub-area of the city that was going to be zoned in a certain way, and we wanted to make sure that future uses would conform to what we adopted in the Portland Plan and we're about to adopt in the comp plan, that we have the right, the authority to include additional information with that, as long as we are very explicit and specific about why we chose to do that, is what I heard. Is that accurate?
Yes. I mean, you are the policymakers along with the city council. It's your judgment as to what policies you want to embody in the comprehensive plan. My word to you is the farther afield you get from what's traditional land use considerations, the greater the element of risk that that actual implementation could be challenged in the future. Right. So there's a balance to be struck, and I simply wanted to strike that cautionary note that you consider that balance as you move forward.
Right.
Of course, this is all hypothetical.
Yes. And part of the answer depends on how you view the relationship between the Portland Plan and the comprehensive plan.
Right.
I mean, one view is that the Portland Plan is a big broad umbrella, and the comprehensive plan is one tool among many to implement that plan. Another view is that the entire Portland Plan needs to be fit into the comprehensive plan. That's a very different proposition.
And my second point would be music to my ears. Language matters. And one of the issues we've heard from folks testifying, and I share the concern, is that there is language throughout the current draft that is very ambiguous. Some people might say wishy-washy with regard to consider, contemplate, as opposed to an active verb. So language does matter, and that's one of the major conversations I think we're going to have in terms of are we going to be explicit about what we want to see come out of this plan?
Well, clarity doesn't always mean being directive. One function of using words like consider is to express an aspiration,
right,
something
I get that.
thematically that you want to have factored in.
No,
So
I understand that
That can be a
fully.
deliberate choice.
Right. I know it can be. And down the road, in 5 or 10 years, when a specific issue comes up, and I'm told, well, that was just that was aspirational. We didn't really mean for that to happen necessarily. That's a huge issue that we're going to have to wrestle with here. Thanks. And I've got a question for John too, but I will, as Chris did. Wait.
Are we just
Howard?
attacking Catherine?
You can
Because
go for
I
anybody.
have attacked all, I got no.
It was
So
a loving
you
and
get one
caring
question,
exchange.
and then we'll get to Don, and we'll kind of keep going around. And then
Well, I just want to
Michelle.
echo, frankly, what Mike said in terms of language matters. I think it's critically important. And I obviously agree with you that we should leave out any other study that could be referred back to that we could find was contradictory, hypothetical, or even weird, or all three. So my concern is that we do get the language right in the way we want to say that. And is there a way, or should there be a way to footnote the fact that when we say encourage, we're not screwing around. We really mean we want that to happen by that date. In other words, to use the words effectively and maybe with footnotes to emphasize what this commission in some way unanimously feels it wants to emphasize 20 years from now.
Well, there can be different ways to do that. You could go so far as to define those words in your glossary so that they have a specific meaning for the comprehensive plan. You could do it through plan text. You could do it through ordinance findings. I mean, there are a variety of different ways you could do to make that point clear.
Okay. So we can talk about that,
Yep.
about how strong we want to emphasize what we want to say. Thank you.
Michelle and Don?
Howard asked
Okay.
my question.
Michelle?
Okay. So again, the language matters is important to me as well. And I know we do have definitions in the glossary, and I think one thing would be helpful to have your office involved in, which I'm sure you are already, but as we go forward, is understanding the balancing part of this going forward. When we get to the implementation, if we say protect here, and then we're balancing that with a policy that says encourage or limit, are those going to be equally, they're both policies in the plan, or does one of them get a shift up because of the verb we used? And I think that's going to be particularly important to understand going forward.
Understood. And one thing to keep in mind about a comprehensive plan is it covers such broad territory that it's probably not possible to write a comprehensive plan where every goal in policy is consistent with every other goal in policy. And part of it depends on how the plan will be used. For example, when the council's deciding whether to change the comp plan designation for a piece of property, the council looks at the goals and policies of the comp plan and decides on balance whether the plan designation should be changed. So there always will be a certain amount of balancing going forward as you implement and apply the plan.
Back to Chris.
Okay, round two.
Okay.
Jonna, as someone whose house has a brick foundation,
Yes.
I get
sorry.
the earthquake risks. What I'm curious about is, as we think about, how we would understand that on a citywide basis, do we have, I think I've asked this question before, but you can refresh my memory, do we have any kind of inventory of the private structures that are, not seismically safe, and could we map that and see where our risk areas
That's
are?
a great question. We have an existing inventory from the 1990s that indicates there's about 1,800 unreinforced masonry structures in the city of Portland. We know, and in large part because of work of Bureau of Planning and Sustainability that did just a snapshot study of not all of them, but took a slice of the stuff in that inventory last year and looked at them, that their estimate was like 25 to 30% of the things in the inventory are wrong. Both that structures are missing and structures that are indicated as URMs are actually not. In the budget bump that's coming to the city council next month, there's a proposal to create a new temporary or limited term position at Bureau of Development Services for an engineer who would work for 18 months to update the inventory. So I think that would be super helpful for us in just quantifying more rigorously the risk. There is also a city working group of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, the PDC, and the Bureau of Development Services that's working right now to think about once we have that updated information, what we could do next to promote retrofits.
But that sounds like it wouldn't reach single-family homes like mine, right?
What kind of program are you looking for?
Well, so my house is a wood structure over a brick foundation, right?
Yeah,
So,
not good,
To
right.
be safe, I should rebuild my foundation,
Right, you
And,
should.
Yeah, could we
So,
understand?
Chris, the wood frame
Are you
building
looking-
fails slowly. So you can run outside.
Yeah.
Did you say liquefied?
So do we have any way to characterize what percentage of single-family houses in the city are at risk?
I wish I could give you the numbers offhand. So houses weren't bolted to their foundation before the mid 1970s, and so if you didn't have to do it, probably most houses built before the 70s, unless they've been retrofitted, are at risk. But the retrofit for brick foundations are a tougher case. But for a lot of them, it's a few $100s to stick it down. It's pretty worthwhile.
Mike?
Yeah. Again, music to my ears. Climate change, resilience. One factor I don't think you referenced in your comments was floodplains. And I'm curious in your reading of the proposed draft what your professional opinion is about addressing floodplains, because we know that there's great potential for them to increase in size as time goes on,
There is, and
or intensity.
there is a chance for them to increase in intensity. I think the plan has a lot of good language about green infrastructure and sort of efforts to use natural systems to reduce flooding. It doesn't specifically say that we shouldn't build more buildings in floodplains, which seems surprising to me.
Me too.
Teresa?
Hi, Jonna. You mentioned liquefaction as a factor in industrial sites. So I'm wondering if you're going to give us some input with some specific designations. You did mention Linton, but we're kind of struggling with industrial lands, and if we're counting on something that's inappropriate, it would be good for us to know that.
Well, so it's kind of comes to what I said at the end, maybe about an earthquake or a big event like that could change everything. I don't think it's realistic to plan to move all of rezone industrial lands not to overlap with liquefaction areas, unfortunately, because that almost all of our industrial land is in a liquefaction zone. Everything that's along the river that's basically sediment or that's built on fill, like Swan Island, that's all at a high risk. But I think that it's important for us to at least recognize that risk, so that we can think about going forward as we do retrofits or redevelopment, that we build in ways that's more resilient to that. And also just to put a little asterisk by our plans to say, well, if everything changes, then everything's different. Then we wouldn't rebuild it the way that it is now.
Any other questions? I have one for Tracy. So housing, you had indicated that stronger language you'd kind of walked away from a little bit. But I'm interested in trying to strengthen housing to have a better assurance as we look over the next 20 years that we do meet the goals because of the challenge we do face that you've laid out in front of us. And so I guess I would be interested in your further comments that you may send in about how we can, I guess it's risk, and how we can, and how close we get to that risk, about better assurances in meeting our goal, and whether that's language or that's explicit, kind of do this, absolutely, that we go from request to encourage to direct, I guess, in terms of getting more specific about meeting our challenges in the future.
So yes, we can do that. I want to make sure I understand. So you're thinking specifically about meeting the goals for affordability?
For affordability, yeah. And so, how can we bring more assurance to that? And I know it's being more directive probably in stronger language, but I'd like to at least that we take a look at it and consider how much of a risk it is.
Yeah, no, we can provide some options, work with staff to sort of think about Plan A and Plan B, perhaps.
Yeah, well, that'd be good.
Okay. Yep. Happy to.
Mike?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for your testimony and thank staff for having the other bureaus come and present information to us. I think this is incredibly helpful to get, just another perspective on particular issues. It's very helpful.
Howard?
Well, I agree. I want to second that. But I do have a question for you, Tracy. Nice to meet you and nice to see you. Housing is an incredibly important part of the comp plan, in my view, and affordable, which is an all over the world kind of word, can mean anything to anybody, needs some more clear and crisp definition, and I hope we can work together to do that. Not by just using HUD statistics or anything other than what you forecast the city needs, where it needs it. And to that end, the cooperation, and I admit I'm a little biased here, with Home Forward is a very important partnership because they have a huge interest in the affordable part of the work. So it isn't illustrated here. It can't maybe be called out in the plan specifically, but collaborating with other housing organizations to reach these goals should be a very serious part of what we have going forward, I think.
Yeah, and I probably can fold in providing comments about assurances of meeting goals of affordability, what on earth we might mean by that, because it's I think we took and we took a couple stabs at, should we try to define workforce housing, should we try to define affordable, and so I can easily provide some thoughts about that. Thank you for your many years of work in housing.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for coming. I think it's tremendously valuable to hear from you. Do we have any other?
Yeah, so next we have PBOT, PBC, and PBS.
We go in order as requested. Okay. Hi, I'm Courtney Duke with the Bureau of Transportation. I'm the senior planner for policy there, and I've been the project manager for the comp plan and the subsequent TSP update. I and other staff have worked closely with BPS and the other bureaus on the comp plan, as well as the previous Portland plan and all the background reports and the periodic review efforts. I'm pleased that the document reflects this collaboration and is also informed by the public and our stakeholders. The comprehensive plan newly incorporates watershed health, increasing our partnerships and outreach, a one-size-does-not-fit-all approach, an emphasis on equity, public facilities, and a robust urban design framework. I think you received our letter yesterday, which lists a number of concerns and suggestions for an even better comprehensive plan. And today I will just highlight a few of those for you and the public. Speaking of language, PBOT would recommend strengthening verbs and identifying more specific outcomes, and we've heard from Catherine some of those concerns. Also, the emphasis on equity is very welcome, but we still see inconsistencies as to how it's defined, where it applies, and with the definition of those terms. And so the terms need to be consistent and well-defined, possibly in the glossary or in other locations. And not just the word equity, but the ways that we're measuring it, and words like disadvantage or underserved need a better definition, and also where we're getting that data. PBOT supports the number of policies throughout the document that supports our current and future work as the right-of-way as a place for people and communities, as well as flexibility in design within the right-of-way and using the context within the pattern areas and the centers and corridors for that design. Vision Zero and safety. We are obviously glad to see the safety as a goal in the transportation chapter. However, the latest draft does not fully support PDOT's vision for Vision Zero, and we have proposed new language. I believe that this came through just through some editing through the BPS staff. So we proposed language in our letter that better supports our goals and work. And we will also be reviewing the document again with an eye towards other places that safety could be included or enhanced. We also appreciate the coordination emphasis of policies within the document, but we think there could be further emphasis on that coordination. It can sort of assume that that coordination is already happening, and some of it is at a staff level, but it could happen at a higher level. And also with our regional partners, we could have additional policies related to that coordination. Public involvement. We support the efforts to include all Portlanders as partners in the city plans and processes while still acknowledging the roles of the neighborhood and business associations. We do have some questions about the shift from the past draft that required these policies to be applied to projects and now shifts to land use decisions, projects, and processes. Although no bureau, including ours, wants all of its work to fall under land use and go to LUBA, the change does seem narrow and should be reviewed again. It's also unclear on then how decisions about other city investments which support the land uses in the plan will be equally inclusive. And unclear how that change in the shift in that emphasis relates to the public involvement policy in the public facilities chapter. So we would like to talk about that more. Just a couple other things that we want to make sure that you're aware of that we're working on internally and externally. The transportation hierarchy is a new policy in the plan, and PBOT and BPS staff continue to work together and with our consultants and stakeholders to best address this policy in the document now and how it will move forward towards implementation. And we recommend that this be a topic of one of your work sessions in the future. And same with parking policies. We are working internally and with stakeholders to refine the parking management policies. And also the Bureau is embarking on a year-long citywide parking strategy that may further inform these policies both in the comp plan as well as a subsequent transportation system plan update. Again, we had more comments in our letter, but we've got a lot of people here, so I think I'll leave it at that. But I'm here if you have questions about what I said today or what's in our letter. And thank you for the opportunity, and it's been great working with the Bureau.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Justin Douglas. I'm Policy Manager with the Portland Development Commission. Just had a few very brief comments. First, I just wanted to acknowledge the staff partnership on this effort. I know it probably is hard for staff to imagine that they're getting close to the finish line, but this has been a massive project and undertaking, and I wanted to thank BPS staff for continuing to engage PDC staff, and especially to Joe and to Eric. And I think all of the partners can say that the public involvement process has really provided valuable input to all of us as sister agencies. And I think I'd also like to note that in addition to the staff coordination, that this commission and the PDC board met earlier this year in a joint work session to discuss the Central East Side. And I hope that's a model that we can continue to work on in the future. I mean, I can think of a couple of topics that might be of interest to both, such as East Portland, where we can really collaborate not just as staff, but as a board, as a commission as well. So one of the comments specific to the draft comprehensive plan that I wanted to make was how much we appreciated the tailored approach to Portland neighborhoods. We often talk about Portland as being a place of such unique neighborhoods, but we haven't always treated them uniquely. We appreciate the integrated framework that considers equity, prosperity, and sustainability throughout, and also how to layer and reinforce multiple objectives. I saw on one piece of collateral the quote, "One size does not fit all," and I think that could not capture it better when we talk about how we approach our neighborhoods. That used to be just a concept, and I think it's now being practiced across the city and at PDC. The second thing I wanted to address was how the draft comp plan complements PDC's role as an implementation agency and partner to this effort. First thing I wanted to touch on was on our economic development objectives. We have a diverse and expanding city economy, but I think all of us know that it's not broadly shared by all. We feel that the comprehensive plan and the central city plan under development reflect PDC's focus on high growth traded sector industries as priority areas for the region's job growth, and be that from manufacturing in the Columbia Corridor to entrepreneurs in the Central East Side to software in downtown. And I think one of the challenges for PDC and the city moving forward is how we make those opportunities available to historically disadvantaged populations. The second side of the implementation is PDC's role in placemaking and in redevelopment. And two things I'd like to call out that we're working on now with our Bureau partners that I think articulate how the draft comprehensive plan and our work is evolving are our neighborhood-specific action plans in East Portland. By way of example, in the Lentz action plan, we're committed to neighborhood business development and vitality while the residential development market moves to a tipping point. Likewise, the Gateway action plan, which we're working on with staff, will reflect the comprehensive plan's increases in job supportive employment lands, which we see as key to the regional center's future. In both of those cases, I think what's important, and this is getting to the tailored approach is how important it is to consider infrastructure investments, public investments, and the impact that they have on those communities, and working with those communities first. So particularly in markets that are evolving, that we understand how public actions change these places and how we can make that happen for the better. Pleased to be here. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Douglas Hardy with the Bureau of Development Services, Land Use Services. I am a supervising planner in BDS, and with me today is Stephanie Beckman, senior planner with BDS. We would like to start by commending the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability on an ambitious and some would say daunting update of the city's comprehensive plan. We in BDS look forward to the continued cooperation with BPS and the many other bureaus who have been involved in this process to make the plan basically, we hope, a recognized model, not only within the state but beyond Oregon. Our comments today will focus on, we'll basically summarize four issues of primary concern that we raised in a October 15th, 2014 memo provided to Director Anderson. These concerns focus on how the proposed goals and policies of the plan will be implemented, as that is an area that directly impacts the work of BDS. The October 15th memo also identified detailed comments that, if addressed, would improve the implementation of the updated comprehensive plan. The first concern we wanted to raise was the community involvement procedures for discretionary land use reviews. The Bureau of Development Services will be using the updated comprehensive plan on a regular basis when considering land use applications submitted by the public that request a comprehensive plan map amendment for a specific parcel of land. And in determining whether those proposals meet the land use approval criteria, BDS must find that on balance, the requested comprehensive plan map designation equally or better meets or better supports the relevant goals and policies of the comprehensive plan than the existing designation. The goals and policies included in Chapter 2 of the proposed comprehensive plan identify ways of involving the community in land use planning. However, the goals and policies appear really to be more suitable for a legislative planning effort as opposed to a land use review process. And as written, these goals and policies can be interpreted to mean that the identified ways of increasing community involvement in planning efforts also apply to land use review that BDS conducts for comprehensive plan map amendments for these site-specific parcels. And that basically if BDS does not implement those efforts as part of the review, that potentially the goals and policies are not met. And our specific concern for that is land use reviews are limited to a 120-day period. Comp plans are not held to that 120-day clock, but it again raises the ambiguity of what policies apply to the legislative reviews versus land use reviews. The requirements for community involvement for land use reviews, including public notice, the posting of a site, hearings, when the hearings are held, et cetera, are already contained in the zoning code, and these requirements are consistent with state law. BDS requests that Chapter 2 of the plan be amended to clarify that the proposed community involvement efforts apply solely to the legislative proposals. The plan could include a statement that encourages land use review applicants who are seeking a comprehensive plan map amendment to follow the relevant community involvement procedures identified in those goals and policies. BDS does recognize that there may be needed amendments to the zoning code that improve upon the public notification and community involvement requirements for land use reviews, and we hope to continue to work with BPS on those amendments. And in summary, we ask that BDS requirements for community involvement remain in the zoning code, and that amendments to the comprehensive plan do not create that ambiguity about what those requirements may be. Our second area of concern is the approval criteria for those comprehensive plan map amendments, again, that are processed through a land use review. Those are contained in policy 10.2C of the proposed comp plan. Chapter 10 of the proposed comp plan addresses administration and implementation of the plan, and policy 10.2C contains what reads as approval criteria for land use reviews involving an amendment to the comprehensive plan map. We have a number of concerns about, again, the ambiguities that the proposed wording of the policy raises. First, it doesn't seem appropriate to include approval criteria for land use review in the comprehensive plan itself. The approval criteria for a comprehensive plan map amendment and in fact for all other land use reviews that implement the comprehensive plan are already included in the zoning code and are not specifically stated in the comprehensive plan. Secondly, as proposed, there's quite a bit of redundancy in the approval criteria stated in policy 10.2C. For example, the first bullet or approval criteria under this policy states that the requested map amendment must strike a reasonable balance among the relevant goals and policies of the plan. And then several of the subsequent bullets focus on specific goals and policies of the plan, such as the guiding principles, involvement of impacted communities, and transportation. It's unclear to us why reference to these specific goals and policies is included in the plan when, as part of the approval criteria contained in the zoning code, they have already been evaluated as part of the overall balancing of the goals and policies. To simplify and clarify this issue, BDS requests that policy 10.2C be revised to state the comprehensive plan map amendments processed as a land use review are held to the specific approval criteria that are contained in the zoning code. Otherwise, it does create confusion to have two sets of approval criteria for a single land use review type. And one last point to raise about the proposed approval criterion in policy 10.2C. The last criterion bullet states that the comprehensive plan map amendments are required to be consistent with any adopted applicable area plans. And many, as you probably know, many of these adopted area or neighborhood plans are decades old and vastly outdated. Policy 1.15 of the proposed comp plan recognizes this in stating that while these area plans remain in effect, the current comprehensive plan goals and policies supersede them in cases where there's a conflict. Rather than raise the potential for substantial debate between applicant and neighbors during the land use review process, and between applicants and city staff, between city staff and, basically to avoid those debates about what policies or goals supersede what goals and policies of the neighborhood plan. BDS strongly urges BPS to maintain and update the area plans over time. Alternatively, if not updated, it may be appropriate to sunset some of the older area plans, particularly those that have been superseded by more current planning studies. And with that, I'll hand it over to Stephanie.
I'm just going to quickly go over a couple more points. In our October 15th memo, we also provided comments about the approval criteria for zoning map amendments. This is in policy 10.3B, again, in chapter 10. These are amendments processed through the quasi-judicial land use procedures to bring the zoning into conformance with the comprehensive plan, generally from a less intense zone to a more intense zone, as shown on the comprehensive plan map. Currently, the criteria for zoning map amendments in conformance with the comprehensive plan are simply that adequate public services be available to serve the more intense development under the proposed zone. Based on the proposed draft, these criteria will essentially be the same, However, there's a new public service proposed to be added that school district capacity would be also considered, along with water, sewer, transportation, et cetera. There is a clarifier that that this would only apply where a school facility plan exists, and it's our understanding that only 2 of the school districts in the city actually have a school facility plan. So we would request that it will be really important, so there is an ambiguity about when this applies or not, that a school facility plan be defined, what that is and what elements it must contain in order to for this requirement to apply. That way it'll be clear to everyone, applicants, staff, and the public when it does apply. We also would like to note that it will be necessary for the school districts where the specific site is located to respond to the question of adequate school capacity in these land use review cases. We want to make sure that the school districts will be prepared to respond to individual land use cases within the prescribed deadline and provide an explanation of how they determine there is or is not adequate capacity. And one last item regarding comprehensive plan land use designations and the corresponding zones listed in policy 10.5. As you know, there are new mixed-use designations shown on the comprehensive plan map and listed in the plan. And we understand from conversations with BPS staff that the corresponding commercial zones listed in the plan are a placeholder at this point for the proposed new mixed-use zones that are currently under development. We also understand there will continue to be several corresponding zones for each of the new mixed-use designations, and we want to emphasize the importance of providing very clear descriptions of the new mixed-use zones and where they should be applied in order to have adequate direction when there are applications for a zoning map amendment in a specific location. This will be really important both for quasi-judicial processes as well as future legislative processes as well. As Douglas mentioned, we have provided some detailed comments as well. We're not going to go over those, but kind of echoing what the city attorney has already mentioned, one overarching comment would be to try as much as possible to use very clear and consistent terms throughout the plan and define their meaning where possible. This will be very helpful for those using the plan and making findings against it in the years to come once it's implemented. And that concludes our comments. We have raised these issues in meetings with BPS staff and have had productive dialogue about addressing them. We look forward to continuing to work with them as the plan moves forward. And thank you again for the opportunity to comment, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions? Don?
I have a few. I read through your letter pretty carefully. It's in the record now, and appreciate the kind of reality check on all these things because you guys are on the implementation side. So Douglas and Stephanie, I appreciate the dose of reality. A couple things I want to clarify on zone change and comp plan amendments. When you do a zone change that brings a site into compliance with the comprehensive plan, scrutiny levels reduced. Does it still go to council for final approval?
No.
Okay, so
Only on appeal.
Okay, so it's at hearings officer that decision is made. Now, when you're out of compliance with the comp plan, you're truly amending the comprehensive plan, that goes up to council for decision. Is that correct? Okay, so I appreciate your clarity on that. One thing I would say about the school situation, a lot of other communities have system provider letters. So if I do a land use action, say in Washington County or Beaverton, we have to request service provider letters from all the agencies. That includes traffic, that's sewer, water. Schools are also part of that. Do you envision a process like that in Portland, where someone at the school district is in charge of kind of monitoring land use with you guys and provides a systems provider letter that discusses their capacity and if they can handle the extra development?
I think, yes, definitely there will need to be a point person at the school district who can respond to those. I think certainly as it's proposed in the comprehensive plan, the school district would be no different than the Bureau of Environmental Services or PBOT in responding to the particular proposal. So we at BDS definitely would be reliant on the school district to be providing effectively that statement, that form, whatever form that may take,
Yeah.
to demonstrate that goal or policy is met in the comp plan.
Because in actuality, it's more complicated than it sounds because we have 4 districts.
Right.
And we've had Superintendent Grotti from David Douglas testify that they have no capacity at all. Forget about it. Yeah, and actually, one of the other district superintendents who sits on our commission say, well, we have capacity right next door.
Right.
But you'll still need to get these service provider letters on a per district basis. Is that accurate, Douglas?
We will, and that, you raised a good point of, and as the city attorney indicated, at least for the approval criteria for a land use review comp plan amendment, we need to look, determine on balance, are the goals and policies met? So certainly that particular circumstance, if one school district says, sorry, we're at capacity, does that alone basically lead to a denial for that particular
Yeah, and
proposal?
we're kind of charting a new course here with school impact.
It
And
is.
is it considered a critical service? Is
Right.
it deemed as a critical service by the state of Oregon? So, we kind of have to hit that high-level policy first before we put this program in place.
Right, and is that sort of a heavier weighted, if you will, sort of factor that we need to consider?
Yeah, because on balance is a real tricky term.
It is.
Is it on balance calibrated or is it on balance?
Right, and every case can be different.
Okay, great. So there would be that flexibility in thinking about it.
Well, and that certainly as it relates to the school districts is, I think, an unknown factor that needs to be discussed further in terms of is that weighted more heavily than the other?
Well, having them engaged in this process, making this change is really positive. It takes the element of surprise out for them so they can plan. So
Yes.
I really appreciate your effort in that direction. And while I'm at it, Justin, thanks for coming on PDC's behalf. And I want to tell you, it's great. I love their new focus on kind of neighborhood projects, catalytic projects, placemaking. Really appreciate your comments on that this evening. So thank you.
Chris Howard.
I want to express my appreciation to PBOT for the proposal on the safety language. I think including that key phrase, eliminate traffic deaths, really puts you in line with Vision Zero, and it's the way we need to go. So thank you. Howard.
I just want to comment on the joint meeting we had with the Portland Development Commissioners last spring, yesterday, not too long ago. And in the spirit, one, of plans that now seem to be coming into fruition, Portland plans, comp plans, and what have you, a spirit of cooperation and collaboration at the board levels would be very much appreciated in terms of working more closely together, so that one doesn't kind of outrun the other or get behind each other in the intent of the plan, the Portland plan, the comp plan, or whatever. So I love you to take that message back to your commission and say that we, I hope, sit down with these folks, and there's some new members that I'm very excited about, and talk about what we can do collaboratively and timely together, so we're in each other's dossier and in each other's light. Thank you.
Thank you. Will do.
Other questions? I just have one, or maybe a couple. On this 10.2C, the ambiguous language around land use and the zoning code, relative to neighborhood involvement, I guess, are you saying you don't want us to say what neighborhood involvement should not be relative to our policy and leave it in the zoning code? Or are you, I guess I'm trying to figure out where you want us to go, and I'm concerned only because we had an earlier discussion about increasing neighborhood involvement.
Right. So I guess there are sort of two questions there. One is certainly to clarify in the proposed comprehensive plan what of those neighborhood involvement efforts apply to legislative reviews versus what apply to land use review processes. Obviously, when an applicant submits a comp plan amendment for a site-specific parcel, it won't go to the same extent in terms of neighborhood involvement as a area-wide study. So there's not going to be the open houses, the charrettes, everything else. Yeah. The way the community involvement is written right now, it really is directed toward that legislative, that broader, long-term 6-9 month process that obviously cannot happen with a land use review. So number one, we're asking just to clarify of the desires for community involvement, what ones really are appropriate for a legislative versus a land use review. Okay. And then to the second point, in terms of the approval criteria, I guess our basic point is keep the approval criteria for a comprehensive plan map amendment in the zoning code for at least those comp plan amendments going through a land use review. As it's written now, there's a set of they read as approval criteria in the comp plan, and they're different than certainly what those approval criteria we have in the zoning code. So it's not clear, number one, do those approval criteria in the comp plan in some way supersede or have more weight than those that are in the zoning code? So I think from that perspective, really all we're saying is be clear what are the approval criteria for the land use review comp plan amendments, and basically keep those in the zoning code.
Okay. And this is just more a question for, I guess, Eric or Joe. So the comp plan and the zoning code and the old area plans, does the comp plan supersede the old neighborhood plans eventually? If I look out, I mean, is that the ultimate intent? Because we've got a Portland plan, comp plan, we've updated all those zones and everything at that point. I mean, I don't know if we're ahead of ourselves on that decision, but
no, it's a good question. The approach we've taken was at the start of this process was to review and sort of mine those area plans to bring concepts and ideas that they had in them that were really have citywide implications or application, put it into the comprehensive plan. We tried to pull up as much, because we've been doing those area plans, over such a long period of time. They really do sort of chart a generational or the evolution of our thinking about how to handle different types of development. And because we have did it in the past, often just in an area plan way, they didn't apply to all the different places where they should. So we've tried to pull up a lot of that thinking and put it into the comprehensive plan. And also, much of what's in the area plans, it varies, but there's comprehensive plan relevant material in those area plans, and there's things that really are kind of like community development action plans. And so it's a little bit all over the board. And once again, every sort of decade's version of those plans evolved the practice. So we've tried to pull up the ideas in those plans. We've tried to build that into the comprehensive plan where appropriate. Our intention is that take a look at this comprehensive plan afresh, because that's what's going to apply. We didn't want to, really just didn't have the capacity or time to completely unbundle or redo those area plans, so they reflect a consensus or a point of view about an area that's dated from a time. So we want to keep them in the record so that as we go along doing refinement plans, we've got something to reach back into. But we're simplifying the rules, putting it into the comprehensive plan. That's what that's what trumps what's in the area plans.
Okay.
Is that accurate?
So I was actually going to flagged that as one of the things we should take up in our work session schedule. So if we could figure out somewhere to slot that in and discuss it a little more depth, I think it merits it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Anybody else wish to be heard?
Yeah.
Before we render our
Hold your
decision.
peace.
I'm ready to vote now.
So nobody from Parks?
Oh, by all means, go ahead.
I get you off the hook?
Oh, we have just one. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. I'm Jim Hagerman. I'm Interim Director for the Bureau of Environmental Services. Members of the Sustainability Commission, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you this evening about the comp plan update. And I also want to thank the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Under the leadership of Director Susan Anderson and Principal Planner Eric Engstrom, the Bureau has done an excellent job of crafting policies, land use proposal, and a list of infrastructure projects that provide valuable direction for development over the next 25 years. We also appreciate their efforts to engage BES in the development of the proposed comprehensive plan. The city's Bureau of Environmental Services is charged with protecting public health, the water quality of streams and groundwater, and healthy ecosystems in our watersheds by providing sewage and stormwater collection and treatment services to accommodate Portland's current and future needs. Tonight, I'd like to talk with you briefly about how the proposed plan relates to our Bureau's mission, the relationship between land use planning and our work, to voice our support for the elements of the proposed plan that promote better water quality and watershed health, and to share our thoughts about how the proposed plan can support connections between economic development and environmental health. So when Portland first adopted its comprehensive plan in the 1980s, it was motivated by a desire to protect Portland and the state's quality of life. At that time, planning practice brought new attention to the connections between transportation planning and land use. The resulting policies, zoning, and public investments continue to serve Portland well by promoting active transportation and creating neighborhoods where many Portlanders can meet their daily needs close to home. Recently, there's been a lot of attention locally, nationally, and internationally on integrating green infrastructure into planning practice. Portland's proposed comprehensive plan update reflects that evolution. Its policies for land use, urban form, economic development, transportation, environment, and watershed health all work together to form an articulate and forward-looking set of priorities for the future. Environmental Services is responsible for making sure that the City of Portland complies with state and federal clean water regulations. And we do this by investing in stormwater infrastructure, managing programs to prevent pollution, and by administering stormwater management requirements for development. We are also responsible to ratepayers to make efficient use of financial resources. This relates to land use and development because some of the biggest problems with water quality are related to runoff from private property and public roads. And the most cost-effective way to address these problems is by preventing them from happening in the first place, or in other words, by managing stormwater at its source. Without this kind of approach, the collective impact of individual actions can be significant. Poorly managed runoff can damage homes and businesses, undercut roads, erode hillsides and stream banks, and contribute to dangerous landslides and flooding, and can even cause combined sewers to back up into basements. Through thoughtful planning, we can reduce these impacts of development and reduce the need to pay for costly piped infrastructure. Most Portlanders are probably familiar with the combined sewer system, and in parts of Portland, sewage and stormwater flow into the same pipes that go to the treatment facilities. Portlanders have invested well over $1 billion to greatly reduce combined system overflows into the Willamette River. What many people don't know is that in more than half the city, including parts of downtown, most industrial areas, and most of southwest and east Portland, stormwater doesn't go to the treatment plant. Instead, it goes into sumps or directly into creeks and streams. Our rivers, streams, wetlands, and floodplains are part of the stormwater system, even if they don't look like it. Where drainage is good, where rainwater soaks into the ground easily, this isn't a problem. But when the soil doesn't soak up the rain, or there are steep slopes, or where a large amount of stormwater goes into a stream, this can cause problems. We inherited some of these problems, like the limits on capacity in our combined system and the absence of a connected stormwater system in much of the recently annexed parts of the city.
Unfortunately, some of the problems are the result of poorly designed development. The resulting impacts of landslides, flooding, sewer backups, and degradation to local streams affects property values, public safety, and the integrity of our roadways and other public infrastructure. Increasingly, we're using green streets, eco-roofs, swales, and restored wetlands and floodplains to improve water quality and regulate the flow of stormwater. Managing stormwater close to the source is often more cost-effective than piping it away for treatment, because complex pipe systems are expensive and not always feasible. The Tabor to the River program is a good example of this. In parts of southeast Portland, rainstorms caused sewer backups in local basements. By investing in green streets, tree plantings, schoolyard rain gardens, and pipe improvements, Environmental Services has been able to significantly reduce sewer backups and preserve the capacity of the combined system. It's not about whether to do gray infrastructure or green infrastructure. It's about both, using the right tool in the right place. Environmental Services is pleased to see that the proposed plan responds to many of the current and emerging challenges our Bureau is facing. The updated policies provide direction needed to respond to evolving state and federal water quality requirements, which are likely to lead to more stringent regulations. ESA-listed species and new legal rulings, which may also lead to stricter regulations, and the anticipated impacts of climate change on public health, infrastructure, and ecological systems. The plan does this in several ways. The Environment and Watershed Health Chapter incorporates key goals of the 2005 Portland Watershed Management Plan around water quality, hydrology, habitat, and biological communities, which guide much of our work related to stormwater management, green infrastructure, and watershed health. The proposed plan also places a strong emphasis on integration, which we see reflected in policies throughout the document that support water quality and watershed health. The plan's emphasis on focusing growth in centers and along corridors is an important strategy that also supports environmental services work by making efficient use of public infrastructure investments. It also promotes new development in areas that are already heavily built or paved, and this can actually reduce the impacts of imperviousness by triggering tree planting and on-site stormwater management. The result will be more urban and greener development. We also strongly support the plan's proposed civic corridors, city greenways, and habitat corridors. When planned together, these corridors can create an integrating green infrastructure network that enhances urban design, climate resiliency, and active transportation. The Economic Development Chapter's first goal on prosperity makes a clear connection between environmental and economic well-being. Portland's reputation for its green practices has contributed to our economy, in part by fueling a growing tourism industry and enhancing the city's appeal to green energy and outdoor recreation companies and to young entrepreneurs. Our expertise in green infrastructure also supports job growth in the trades, like those supported through training programs by the nonprofit Verde. In our industrial areas, it's tempting for some to pit jobs against the environment, but we believe that's an oversimplification. As the proposed plan points out, brownfield cleanup is one critical strategy for helping meet our projected industrial lands needs. In the Columbia Corridor, where stormwater flows directly into the Columbia Slough, restored natural areas help clean and manage stormwater so we can meet our state and federal water quality obligations. Unfortunately, one of the most significant economic challenges we face, the listing of Portland Harbor as a Superfund site, is the result of historic decisions that inadequately weighted long-term environmental consequences. Though that thinking was based on the best information at the time, it led to costly problems that we're left to manage today. The resulting uncertainty about when and how those lands could develop hampers economic growth in a critical part of our industrial area. Fortunately, today we know more about the links between development, water quality, and our natural systems. So we should use that knowledge to make informed decisions about Portland's industrial growth so that to the extent possible, we avoid creating these kinds of problems in the future. Since Portland's first comprehensive plan was adopted over 3 decades ago, we've improved in many ways, as evidenced by a cleaner Willamette River and our world-renowned bike and transit networks. Yet emerging challenges like climate change require thoughtful consideration as we plan and act for the future. The proposed comprehensive plan sets a high yet attainable aspiration for the next 25 years, that all Portlanders benefit from good jobs and good neighborhoods, access to urban amenities, and a healthy environment. Its provisions provide clear direction and smart strategies that we can build on. We appreciate taking part in developing the comprehensive plan update and look forward to its implementation. Thanks for considering our comments. We've also submitted detailed testimony about the proposed plan. We hope you find our comments useful in your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments? Mike?
Yeah, in reading through, I think there's like 10 or 12 pages, you actually have outlined very specific language changes that you're recommending that, many of which we've heard about. I know in reading between the draft and the proposed draft, there have been some significant changes. I appreciate the fact that you, and we've asked other folks to do this, to be as specific as possible in giving us recommendations on language. We don't have time tonight to go through all those, but I just want to say that I, for one, appreciate seeing these recommended changes. And I don't know, we can't, I guess one question I have regarding all the testimony we've heard tonight from the other bureaus. Well, first of all, it's obvious that there's been a lot of collaborative work that's gone on, which is great. Let's see, I'm trying to think of our role in addressing these requests for modifications. Can we assume that some significant percentage of the requested changes from the other bureaus would be just acted on it basically as a consent agenda, and that we would likely then see maybe 10 or 20% of where there's disagreement between BPS and that particular bureau, and then it might be up to us to say we'd prefer to see it go this way or another way.
Yeah, that's an accurate characterization. We're going to go through and review the written comments in detail, and we too appreciate sort of the line edits that people gave us. That's actually the most helpful. Some of these there's some issues to be resolved amongst bureaus too, so we're going to try to work all that out on these changes, and we'll bring forward to you the ones that we can't hit a sweet spot on and try to make clear what the disagreement is, so that it can be part of your deliberation.
So a specific question I have, a concern I've got, is that there actually is a lot of good language with regard to green infrastructure, and one of your recommendations, as I recall, is to take some language that was taken out of the urban design chapter and put it back in with regard to integrating the green infrastructure with the gray in the I guess you would say in the more hardcore urbanized portion of the city. And one of the concerns I've got is aspirations are great, but the reality is, in terms of trying to meet density targets and so forth, things like lot lines building up to the edge of the property tends to make it very difficult, if not impossible, to incorporate more urban forest canopy, for example, in the central city. To the extent you've got suggestions on how we address that conundrum, trying to really intensify development, but also move beyond where we've been to integrate with the eco-roos, with urban forest canopy, with more vegetation associated with that development. If you've got suggestions on how to go about doing that, I know other cities have been really working on this very hard. It would be helpful.
No.
And that's true for BPS staff as well, for all the bureaus.
Yeah, and Mike, I appreciate your comment about new infill development. And it could actually be part of the solution because of the new standards. And it'd be great to project that kind of thinking towards our industrial lands in particular, which are kind of typically in sensitive areas. And maybe if those are updated, there's more intensification, more job density at those facilities. That's redevelopment that would be in compliance with new standards. So technically, it could help.
Well, and the infill development, though, is also associated with the loss of urban forest canopy.
Yeah.
That's my understanding, at any rate. That's a very significant contributing factor, which is, trees are one of the best ways to address stormwater on site.
Right.
So,
well, hopefully there'd still be a street tree program.
Right.
Right? A good, strong street tree program, but you're thinking of on-site. On some of these underutilized sites, we'd lose canopy, Mike?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Other questions? I just have kind of building on what the conversation is previously about the looking at East Portland, and it's probably resource deficient when you talk about stormwater and a lot of things, especially around streets. But we've targeted it for a lot of development, and that balance of when you talk about lot lines, and then this is a lot of just residential development. I don't need to answer today, but just how you would look at that balance so that that neighborhood and really that region of our city achieves that kind of balance of sustainability, a rich environment of street trees and stormwater management, but also we're able to meet the housing needs of that community in a very sustainable way. And I guess your help is going to be valuable because we've got to put a lot of people out there, and I just don't want to do it. Doing it poorly will have the ramifications long term with us.
To introduce myself, I'm Marie Wakowitz, and I'm Environmental Program Coordinator at Bureau of Environmental Services, and I've been a liaison to BPS on the comprehensive plan. The points about East Portland are good ones. I want to reiterate comments I heard from some of the other bureaus that one of the strengths of the comprehensive plan update is that it doesn't take that one-size-fits-all kind of approach. And recognizes that different areas have different characteristics. Within East Portland, we have different soil conditions, we have different infrastructure types, and we have different stormwater management needs. So in some areas of East Portland, we might not have a piped system, but the soils themselves can actually infiltrate a lot of stormwater, and the ability to provide stormwater is not a challenge. In other places, it's more difficult. So for instance, in the Buttes, at the far southeast, the soils don't infiltrate well. We have a lot of runoff that's going to Johnson Creek and its tributaries, and it's not managed in the ways that we would hope it would be. And that can create a lot of problems, as Jim mentioned. So I think as we're talking about East Portland, it's important that we think about the sub-areas within East Portland and what our infrastructure needs are in terms of stormwater management, and then also how that fits with our transportation needs and our parks needs as well. So I think PBOT's openness to looking at different kinds of street standards, I think, is going to be really beneficial in places like East Portland, because it'll give us some more flexibility how to provide the transportation needs in relatively narrow rights of way and also meet our stormwater needs. I think that's going to be really good. It gives us a better toolbox to work from that responds to local conditions. So I think in a lot of places that's going to be helpful. There are going to be some places like in the far south and in the far north where we're more challenged because of infiltration. In some places, like in Lentz, we're doing restoration projects where we're actually doing what looks like a park. You know, we have the Foster floodplain out at 104th and Foster Road. It's larger than Laurelhurst Park. It manages a 7-year flood where Foster Road used to flood every other year. It now will flood much less frequently. Looks like a park, but it's actually a giant stormwater facility. And so in some places, we're going to have to do those kinds of approaches, maybe not at that scale, maybe a smaller scale, to make sure that our natural systems can handle the water that's coming off of the landscape and in some cases off of development.
Great. Mike?
Yeah, and on that point, that last point, I think the comp plan process is a great opportunity to better educate the public and even some policymakers with regard to what the Bureau's mission is. First of all, the public doesn't even know there are two bureaus, the Water Bureau and BES. A lot of people are very confused about that. But they certainly, and even the mayor at various times, various mayors and commissioners refer to themselves as the Sewer Bureau Commissioner, which couldn't be further from the truth in terms of what the Bureau's mission is with regard to watershed health, ecosystem, salmon recovery, responding to climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So to the extent that we really can use this as an educational process to educate the folks about what the Bureau's real mission is, I think to think explicitly about that, I think would be an important part of this whole process. Like just reading the material you presented us really gives a pretty good picture of what the Bureau's up to. It's not just putting sewage in a pipe and shooting it to Columbia wastewater treatment.
No, that would be relatively simple in comparison.
Yeah.
Catherine.
So I've been struggling with it's one of those balances that we kind of keep struggling with throughout all of these decisions. And as a practitioner, as an architectural practitioner, I put green roofs on a lot of my buildings, total proponent. But I also have been seeing a fair amount of language that's been stating it really doesn't cost anymore, and I'm going to argue it does. And that's not true. But I support it, so I'm not trying to, I want to promote it. So this was part of my challenge. And I do think, especially when we're looking at housing stock and affordability and equity and layering a lot of different requirements, whether it comes down to parking requirements, green roof requirements, I'm just struggling in general with how to make sure that we balance it appropriately, not only for neighbors throughout the city, different neighborhoods that require different things, but also our goals of all our other, I guess, equity and affordability and all that. So just a general statement, I guess, would, I don't know, I'll leave it at that. I was gonna say, would love some thoughts on it, but I keep seeing various, what I would say is conflicting information about, specifically about green roofs that I'm struggling with, because I want to promote them, but I don't believe that they're cost neutral, because I know they're not in what I've been doing.
So one thing that would be very helpful would be to have not just upfront costs and whether there's an increment additional costs, but long-term maintenance. For example, eco-roofs definitely, I know, extend the life of the roof 10, 20, 30 years beyond what you might have with a normal roof. So having both the upfront costs and the, I guess, long-term ROI would be very helpful in those kinds of analyses.
Right, and I don't have expertise in eco-roofs, so I can't respond directly to your question, but I think, again, it's about fitting the right tool in the right situation. So what that cost increment is different on a single-family home, it's right, than it is on a 15-story building in downtown. So, and as you factor in stormwater requirements and having a space perhaps for your tenants or for the residents to use, that makes the cost a little different. But I think, again, that's part of what's challenging for all of us in talking about stormwater management is it's really important. We've done our best to do our job as a good utility so that you all don't have to deal with it very much, but we reach a certain point where we all have to kind of share in taking care of the issues. And when we don't, we run into problems. So I think we need to, what makes it challenging is that, again, there's not a one-size-fits-all. And so how to provide enough specificity to be useful, but not so much specificity that it's prescriptive and doesn't respond to the local conditions. And part of that is providing direction in the policy, and part of that is talking through the tough issues when we're dealing with implementation. So just before this meeting, I was sitting in a meeting on the mixed-use zones where we're talking about, what are the development standards? So what's going to be required, and what would the bonuses be, and how would those function? And we need to think about those not just in terms of what we want to accomplish or in isolation, but we have to think about those in relationship to other requirements that are going to be put on the developer when they're doing that. So we know we have stormwater requirements that developers need to respond to, and how does that fit with the bonus structure, and how does that fit with the zoning structure? So I think one of the most heartening things to me about this process is that we're developing that more robust and more sophisticated dialogue. I personally have been a little bit envious of Office of Transportation. 10 years ago, they were right here at the table about just about every issue that you all were talking about, and it's really been helpful for us to be more involved and be able to talk through the tough issues and how zoning and stormwater management on the public side, but also on the private side, how those pieces all fit together. So I don't know, that's not really an answer, except for.
We're on the same page.
Well, we have,
Oh, no, that's good. I mean, go ahead.
we have an opportunity, December 9th, BES staff is going to do a presentation on green infrastructure. And one of the things you can convey to who, I don't know who's doing the presentation, Catherine's question, that to include that kind of information to the extent you can with regard to costs and long-term benefits. And we're also going to hear from some progressive local developers with regard to green roofs and other green infrastructure issues. So we can have a good conversation at that time on those issues. No, we'll tape it.
I will watch it. I will watch it. I promise.
Any other final questions? Huh? Don.
A quick one on green roofs and low-impact development methodologies in general. I understand, that there might be bonuses on the mixed-use zone side, density bonuses, et cetera. But month-to-month ongoing, is your bill that you pay for stormwater services reduced when you put those measures in place?
And so we probably don't.
I think that might depend.
Depends. Okay.
It might depend on whether you're doing it to meet your basic requirements or whether you're going above and beyond. But we would, we're a big and complicated or sophisticated bureau, and
better.
So there are other folks who would be more knowledgeable.
I can say there is a credit, a partial credit on the bill for on-site stormwater management.
Okay, so you
Okay,
hit a
what
certain
that would
threshold.
be,
So Jim,
I
if you
can't
go
say.
over a threshold, there might be a credit.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, but there's a base.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for your testimony. And I want to thank everybody from the bureaus that came and testified. It really is gratifying to see the bureaus coming and providing testimony, and it's enlightening to us. I think we've heard from all the commissioners say how valuable it is for us to hear from you and to also hear that you're working with BPS staff to work on these issues, because it's easier for us in the end if we have a small set of issues to resolve versus a large set. And so I think it's also credit to BPS, Joe, Susan, Eric, and all the staff that are working with all the bureaus on a massive undertaking and trying to resolve all the issues. Thank you, too.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yes.
So will there be a red line that shows everything that changed between the?
So good transition.
Between the January and the July draft, too.
Well, if we're talking about,
Tracking.
the bureaus coming to agreement, I'd like to know what they agreed to.
Yeah, and to see how it changed. I think that's a great idea, red line.
There is, maybe this is a good opportunity to walk through the sequence of where we're headed and how that, because that's part of the sequence
Part
that
of
we're
the
trying
sequence.
to describe to
Yep.
you in this work session.
So this part of the sequence is we're going to talk about this one pager and what the items are on that page. And this is not a discussion about whether the item's valid or not. It's if there's an item you would like or to see or just get an understanding what's involved in centers and corridors, for example, if it's going to take up a certain topic you're looking for. And if you don't think something's on here, can we add it? Yes. If you want to take it off, you don't think it needs a discussion, that's great too. But it's really just to either add or subtract and talk about the timing of each of these issues as we look out in the future of going through our work sessions. And so to start that process, I would, in discussions with the mayor around West Hayden Island, I would like to just request from staff that they come back with a farm and forest strategy for West Hayden Island, and then a policy statement on what would happen if, for some reason, someone wanted to change it to industrial.
It might be helpful if I just kick off the discussion a little bit with the general sequence of how we're going to do this. What we've proposed is a series of work sessions through March that would enable you to walk through what we believe were some of the meatier, more difficult issues that you heard testimony from a variety of points of view on. And so we've spent a lot of time combing through the testimony and trying to pull out those items that were recurring conflicts in the testimony, or also listening to your observations at the end of the different work sessions. There's a limited amount of time in work sessions if we don't want to be here for the next decade. So what we've tried to do is also craft a process where you don't have to talk about everything. And so we are proposing essentially within each work session, there'll be a staff report with each work session topic. And within that staff report, there will be things we will tee up for discussion and direction, and then there may be consent lists that relate to each of those work sessions that we aren't asking you to debate unless you want to, but will be implicit in that work session. So out of each work session, we're getting a general directional direction from you on some specific items and consent to a longer list. Recognizing that not all the topics fit in all the work sessions we've identified, we're also going to be releasing 2 sort of miscellaneous consent lists at different times, and we'll ask you at that point to generally consent to those items. And for all these things that I describe as consent, it will be a statement of direction. It won't be specific language initially. So it might say, policy 3.21, do this. So initially, you'll look at that list and have the opportunity to say, I'd like to talk about that and raise it up to the discussion or not. We will get to a strike-through and underline version built from all of those work sessions and from your consent to those consent list items. That essentially gives us a work plan that we then go and turn into that strike-through and underline version. And our goal would be to release that to you by the first week in April, essentially, so that you have a month to absorb that before the anticipated vote sometime in May, if that makes sense. And so you will, at that point, have in front of you a strike-through and underline that represents the collective direction that you've given us from all those different discussions in the work sessions and the consent list that we've given you. And then, of course, you'll have another opportunity in your final deliberations to get it down into the wordsmithing if you choose to. But that's a general sequence we're proposing, if that makes sense. And then, as Andre said, what we're looking for is from you tonight is this a reasonable approach to the work sessions? Are we covering the topics you want to discuss? And especially if you think something's missing or something that's on here that you don't want to discuss, we're happy to take something off. Or just clarifying questions about, is this issue covered in this particular topic?
So does it make sense? We'll go through like session 1. Does anybody have any additions, subtractions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So balancing decisions, that would include perhaps going through hypotheticals of how this relates to zoning code development?
It covers some of the topics raised by BDS this evening and also some of the city attorney discussion about verbiage and how we balance all the different policies.
I would just want to make sure that it's not limited to plan amendments and map amendments, but also talks about how it's going to inform the zoning code that comes down
Correct.
the line.
It's a broad discussion.
Okay, then I don't know if half an hour is enough, but let's start there.
So kind of tying to that, how many times have we said it? Words are important, and I'm not seeing, or unless it's kind of the thought of that's in here, like a discussion of glossary terms and an agreement on, do we all mean the same thing when we hear prioritize this or protect that or
And it's
enhance
not
that?
yeah, and I would say it's not necessarily what we think it means, it's what the state thinks it means.
Okay,
because
thank
the
you, yeah.
LCD has defined terms as well, and we may say it means something, and that may not be what happens when we get to LUBA.
So I guess, do we understand what
Right.
it means would be a better way to put it.
We did not implicitly or explicitly build that in, so I think if you wanted to add an item to discuss glossary terms, that probably would increase the time demand for that item. So,
Well, and some of
but
that,
that makes sense to me.
I mean, I think you could do in homework and then a discussion over it, but.
Yeah,
somehow.
and all these we are, this is a lot of work, and so all of this we're depending on some amount of homework, and we're anticipating teeing up some choices for you, that so it's not an open-ended discussion on everything, that we come in with these staff reports, and there's going to be some amount of work to anticipate your questions and get feedback before the sessions, so that we're not starting from zero on each of these topics.
Good
at each
plan.
work session.
Yeah.
Any other comments on work session 1? Work session 2, and I'm going to take 3. Mike, you had.
Yeah, I've got a personal issue. And you guys may want to, you guys may think this is just fine. I'm going to be out of the country on the 27th.
I knew that was coming.
So you may think that's a great thing, as a matter of fact.
You will
Maybe
leave
you'll get
things
through that
behind.
session really quickly. So depending on staff and my colleagues on the commission, if we flipped work session 2 and 3 with respect to those dates, is that even conceivable? Is that possible?
It's okay from a staff point of view.
So from the commissioners, is everybody?
Sure.
Is that?
You gotta have Mike
You're
here
out
for
of
the,
it anyway, aren't you?
you gotta be here for that.
I'd like to be, but
Yeah.
I'll be out.
I understand.
Yeah.
I'll be in Mexico.
So, well, we can go to Mexico.
Yeah, that's fine.
We're talking about moving the
Outreach.
commission.
So we're in agreement that we will switch work session 3 to January
I saw
27th,
Deborah raise her eyebrows.
and we will have the January
I don't
work
wanna
session
cause a burden
2
for
on
anybody.
February 10th. It'll still be the same progression
Just different
of
topics.
items in work session 2.
Joe's checking.
Uh-oh.
Is that
we're
okay? I don't want to cause more
Okay,
work for anybody.
We're good. So work session 2, right now as it stands,
Thank you.
is there any additions or subtractions? Chris?
Yeah, so on the topic of West Hayden Island, Andre, I think what I heard you just ask is to look at an option where we essentially preserve the estate.
It would be, in the discussion, that it would be farm and forest for 100% of the island as an option to come back, with a policy statement stating that would direct a future council and commission about if you decided to change the designation, what you would have to do from that standpoint. As an option, that would come back.
I think I understand that. I'd like to add 2 other options to the option table that we look at.
Yeah.
One would be an option for permanent protection. And the second would be an option that attempts to memorialize at an appropriate level of detail for the comp plan our recommendation to reprocess this, so that you have the mitigation criteria, et cetera. So since that has never been adopted by council, it's never been memorialized, so I'd like to see an option that would memorialize that.
Okay. Mike?
So, I have a question. Assuming it's zoned farm and forest, does that automatically mean that it's taken out of consideration for the industrial lands?
For the
acreage?
purposes of the economic opportunity analysis, it would not be counted as
Right.
industrial land.
So that would obviously then tie us, I mean, the big discussion from a land use perspective is going to be the Goal 9 conversation in light of that
Correct.
fact, right?
Yes.
Which is great. We need to have that conversation, so.
We'll bring in, I mean, we fully expect to be able to, for this alternative that Andres asked for, we fully expect to be able to show how we can meet Goal 9, but just by different means.
Right.
And it's, so.
Great. No, I think that we're due for that conversation. It's good. And I like the fact that we've got a range of options to discuss. Once you decide A, then you discuss B or C. But we start with
the economic elements in gold mine. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yep.
Right. Great.
Yep.
That'll be a great session.
So
Always a pleasure.
any other additions, subtractions from session 2? Work session 3,
Which is now.
Which is now
which
two.
is now 2.
I just wonder about the time. I'm happy about this, but 30 minutes, 2 hours, some of these look like conversations that could go longer, but let's set the priority and see how we do.
We did include a schedule check-in at the end of the third one to see how you're doing. For that reason.
We're still here. Chris?
The other thing I would add on that is we, as I said before, we're going to have to tee up choices, so it's not a starting from scratch. And also these do show 4-hour meetings, so that's a discussion that you have to have as to whether that's the preferred approach as opposed to having more meetings.
Yes.
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 Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Isn't there a guy named Hobson that made a choice like
I'd
that?
rather have 8-hour meetings than have more meetings.
Yeah.
Yes, a
Eric,
question.
on
I'm
the
writing
s-
that down.
Okay, hold on.
on the split, oh, sorry. Can I ask a question?
Oh, okay, go ahead, and then I got Michelle.
Okay, go ahead.
Quick one. Split zoning, is this where we talk about all the folks that came before us, many with good ideas about how their property should be zoned, et cetera?
Many of the, you got probably 2 types of individual property owner testimony. Some that would go into this commercial mixed use and split zoning and non-conforming bundles. And then there's some that were related to a later issue about residential stuff. But all the commercial site-specific stuff would be either, in our staff report, we would list all of those properties that you got testimony on and give our rationale and perspective. Some of those may be consent items and some of them may be discussion items, and we'll work on that in the staff report.
Michelle?
Just practically, so do the consent lists relate to the topic of that work session, or are they just sort of a running thing?
No, the consent list will be both.
Relevant.
There's each staff report for each topic will have a consent list, and there's 2 miscellaneous consent lists that are itemized on the agendas for anything else that doesn't really fit with a topic.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Chris?
So I have 3 topics I want to blend in here somewhere. Eric, if one of them belongs in a different session, just let me know. So we have the one relationship to zoning and mixed-use zone project. If we add the institutional zones in there, and my interest is twofold. One is the testimony that some folks say that they prefer the conditional use master plan process over a zoning approach. And I'm interested in the idea of, do we have hard edges or blended edges between the institutions and their surrounding neighborhoods? Second topic would be the one I flagged earlier, which is what happens to the policies, where do they go in this? And then the third one, if you all recall back to the first hearing, I know that's a long time ago now, we had testimony about both broadband policy and open data policy. I intend to propose language before the end of the year for folks to look at, and at least the open data policy, I'm thinking, goes under community involvement. Broadband, I'm not quite sure where it fits, but maybe we take them together. If you just want to send them straight to the consent list, that's fine.
There you go.
The old plans question, or the area and neighborhood plan status question, is, I think, would fit logically under community involvement policies in that topic. The institutional zones, I guess, we made a judgment call that not to include a work session on that. That's kind of up to you. I'm not sure it mixes entirely with the mixed use because they're different issues. It could be carved out as a different topic if we figure out when it would happen.
Well, and part of the reasoning there is in this task 4, the decision is designating an institutional land use, our comprehensive plan designation. Then what you do with it is what the debate is now about, conditional use versus a zoning provision, and that's a task 5 thing. Although the kind of questions you were raising, Chris, I can see they're sort of, they're bridging both.
Can we throw that in the miscellaneous? Not to say it's miscellaneous, but
It's a bucket. We have it.
Yeah.
it is.
But it is. Use the bucket we have.
Can we throw that in that bucket toward the end there?
We do have, and I was going to ask that question of the open data policy too. We do have a segment of time at the end. The last work session we didn't program with the idea that it would be miscellaneous items of interest from individual commissioners, and
Perfect.
we could put, open data. I could see a logic to the public involvement topic being related to it, or it could be one of those miscellaneous topics. It's kind of up to you.
Well, and just for the purposes of tonight, the list of things that you want to flag that you want to talk about is really the thing to get down, and Eric and the team will think about how to fit it in. And even then, we're going to face the fact that there's probably not enough time in the session. So we'll recalibrate once we get going, but let's get the list.
Eric, I just wanted the discussion of 82nd Avenue. So that's in the center and corridors. We had testimony about how 82nd develops and whether housing or commercial, and
There's
is that a zoning choice? I mean, is that it really in the centers and corridors?
There's maybe 3 places where 82nd Avenue comes up. One is that you had a specific set of property owners that were all clustered around a non-conforming issue, which will be in that topic. Some of it will be in the centers and corridors, and then you also have a little bit of it wrapped up in the employment land discussion. So it's going to pop up a couple times.
Where's the non-conforming?
That's on the same night as the centers and corridors discussion.
It's at the bottom.
Right below centers and corridors.
Okay. Okay. So we will catch it. Okay.
Yep. One comment on the calendar, the last one is on the 12th, not the whatever.
Correct. There's a typo on May 14th. That's supposed to be May 12th.
Yeah. I'm actually curious. I've got two issues I'm personally really interested in that we heard some testimony on, and I'm happy to take that offline and just talk with staff about sound and light. I don't see us having a conversation about those issues, but there's some really interesting stuff going on with regard to the soundscape in the city. I went to a third angle performance the other night, and they did some performances based on people's experience with the natural landscape in Portland. And there's some work going on at PSU with Daryl Grant, for example. I just think it's a really important noise and the positive aspects of sound in our lives is huge, and it's a health issue, in my opinion. So don't want to take time here necessarily, but I just want to express to staff I'd like to sit down and have a conversation about that at some point. And if it's possible to get some general statement at least in the comp plan that these are issues that the city should be considering and do some research on and maybe come up with some plans in the future would be cool.
Well, and just
is that possible?
That's absolutely possible. Remember Catherine's sort of advice about the comprehensive plan, but in our work programming right now, we actually entertaining the notion of what is it that's the work program after comprehensive plan, if you can imagine. And there's a whole category of that kind of thing, Mike. It's noise is specifically on there, and it is exactly the phase that you described. What is it that we know about it? What are the regular, what sense are we going to make of this issue for the purposes of, what we do with our long-range planning and development review?
Right.
And is there some there or not? Yeah.
And I would say the same thing about light, that there's a lot of interesting stuff going on around the country with regard to the night sky that can be addressed from a design perspective.
Well, I kind of tied to that, I would say, so to me, it's a big topic of health, and I've kind of been plugging at it slowly here, but food security as part of health too. And I see them kind of all tied together in a very broad topic way, but all interesting.
I'm going to pile on top of that to talk about health. The last thing I was going to put with housing and transportation is should the
Yeah.
Had some testimony about that at one of the hearings.
Right, and air quality is part of this list as well. So it may be we need at some point do we know enough now to stake out a policy, or are we pointing ourselves in this next generation of things to focus on? And air quality was the source of 2 discussions this week already. And what I think I'm learning about it is the first thing that we all would want is sort of a brief on what's a local role, how's it really work, what's the models, and then we would know what the most actionable thing that we could do. And that's not on the timeline necessarily of finishing up the comp plan, but the direction is clear there. And so as you're looking at this, see that kind of thing is what we're pointed towards. Health in general, I think, is the same. We have a big commitment to health. That was a word that was introduced in all of our thinking in the Portland plan. We've started to make some sense of it. How far do we take it beyond that? And I thought Jana's testimony tonight raised a couple of those kind of issues too, where I'm not sure we're at the point to be able to define a policy related to liquefaction yet, but we better get an understanding of how to take it somewhere.
And this is the sort of stuff that when I was asked to serve on this commission, I really did so because I was told that we would be able to, and it was affirmed in our first retreat that we are A, proactive, and B, advocates. And I think that given the collective knowledge here, we could do some interesting stuff around these issues that are outside the normal realm of what the Planning Commission might do.
Yep. So work session 4.
And I would note on work session 4 that you're sharing time, because that's at least half of that that session is a public hearing on the TSP. So we've scheduled on the transportation
TSP.
system plan.
TSP,
So you're going to hear testimony on PBOT's updated financial assessment and their financially constrained project list. So that'll be a long night probably, and because of that, we've put the transportation system plan work session on the next session, just because it'd be fresh in your mind.
Okay. On the school district, I know this is focused on David Douglas, but relative to BDS's conversation tonight about how, and Dawn's comment about how this works, can we look at that whole subject of how school districts, and if we're going to include them as a criteria in the decision-making process, how that process is going to work. And there's only 2 of the 4, as I understood it, in Portland today that would meet the criteria. But if the other 2 decide to do that, then what impact does that have, I guess? I'm not clear.
Well,
the intent of my comment is something that's not challenged.
The Douglas's response was correct to my understanding, which is that with this policy in place, BDS would have to implement a system of having service provider letters from the school district. And in some cases, those letters could be fairly pro forma in the sense that PPS, it's a capacity as a district as a whole. So several of the districts have stated that they do have capacity, and probably there would be a blanket letter that would say that. The challenge would be in David Douglas, and that's kind of the intent, frankly.
Yeah, okay. Right there. Okay, session 5. For housing, Maggie sent some information, and wanted to make sure we capture that. Is that information captured in her, I guess, in the discussion of housing?
I need to pull up that email.
Is TSP, we have that in 2 sessions?
One
No,
is the
we have
hearing, and then there's a work session.
Then the work session. And so the work session on the TSP, it was suggested that we add hierarchy to the discussion.
Yeah, that's
well,
part of it.
okay.
I believe that Maggie's questions were about gentrification and affordability. And that's from what I recall.
Zoning
and so
changes. Anyway,
that's
if
in
you
that
can-
bundle.
it's in the bundle.
We'll go
Okay.
back and review that and make sure
Okay.
that we've got it teed up.
Any other? Work session 6.
So on work session 6, our thinking there was at the end of work session, at the end of work session 4, we would finalize the agenda for work session 6. So we're taking down some of these that you've mentioned tonight as possible candidates for that, and then we'd revisit and fill out that agenda as an agenda item under number 4, so that you have a little bit of time to think up new things that you need to talk about.
So
That's the fun stuff.
we, I think one of the critical questions that we need to think about, we've gone through all the work sessions, but how do we want to add more meetings, or we just want to take 4-hour blocks and kind of plow through these? And I don't know if we need to make a decision today, but maybe at our next, we can get some
Why can't
response.
we decide now? I mean,
Is it typical that 4 hours is enough time, or you say 4, but it's really like 5 or 6? I don't know how you guys do stuff.
This is the first time we're through this.
I say fewer meetings and a little longer.
Me too.
I would say that even at 4, this is pretty aggressive, so it wouldn't surprise me if 4 turns into 5 on a few of those, so we need to figure out if that's okay or not.
And what I would say is, with the commission did get through the Portland plan, and what that process was like was after a few of these sessions, there was a norm that was set about how deliberation goes. Staff reports get more responsive to setting up how you all want to talk about things. So it'll norm out over time, but I fully expect we're going to need more meetings, is my guess.
I think once we get into it, after the first couple, people get comfortable with what the critical points are they need to address. I mean, we do get bogged down on some items, but, and I certainly expect us to get bogged down.
I think we get more reflective.
So
But from
we'll
the
stick with the schedule
conversation-
today, but I would certainly expect on some of the items, I would just say that this, which is going to be session 3, is probably going to be longer than 4 hours.
Yeah, from the
I just would-
perspective of our energy, in order to engage and discuss and make appropriate decisions, it'd maybe be better if we started a little earlier so that we weren't like at 10 o'clock at night and we're like, well, I just agree because I'm tired.
But no, that actually Deborah just mentioned that the way we have the schedule now is we alternate afternoon, evenings. So that's another variable that we can play with, and it depends on your all schedule and convenience.
7 a.m.s, everybody's ready.
No.
I'm not a morning person. That's not me.
And with that, I think we're adjourned.
One thing I would mention just is you heard testimony from a number of city bureaus, but there were a few who have also
Parks didn't
additional.
show up.
Parks has sent a letter in, as well as the Office of Management and Finance and Office of Community Technology. So they all didn't testify in person tonight, but there is a letter from all of them, so I'd encourage you to read those.
Yeah,